Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. I didn't become a park ranger to save the planet or protect wildlife. I did it because it was one of the few jobs where I didn't have to deal with people and I was in dire need of a steady paycheck. In 1999, I landed myself a ranger position at Kisatchie National Forest in Louisiana, far enough from the world to suit my preference, but close enough that I could make it into town for a beer. Not much happened out here, which is exactly how I liked it most days, so let's just say my luck ran out. The morning a hunter, Clyde Murchison, radioed in about a missing buddy. Hunting accidents happen more often than we'd like to admit, but it wasn't the call that got to me. It was what he said next. Clyde mentioned they'd found something, but he couldn't even begin to describe what it was. He just said I needed to get down there fast. I figured it was a cougar attack. Those weren't unheard of out here, and I mentally braced myself for the usual gruesome scene, mangled body, half-eaten carcass, the works. What I didn't expect was the bizarre situation that would soon make me question why the hell I ever thought this gig was a good idea. When I arrived at the location, deep in the forest's southern section, Clyde was pacing back and forth near a dense thicket, his face pale as death. There were 3 others with him, and none of them looked much better. One guy pointed shakily toward the trees and muttered that I needed to see for myself. I wasn't sure what I was looking for at first, but when I spotted the remains of Clyde's friend Eddie, I felt my stomach churn. Eddie wasn't just mauled, he was absolutely torn apart in a way I'd never seen before. Limbs ripped off, skin shredded like paper. It was too much damage for any cougar or bear. That was the first red flag. The second was the sheer brutality of it. This wasn't an animal trying to eat. There was something far worse. Clyde told me the story as best he could, his voice shaking. They'd been quietly tracking a buck when Eddie suddenly went completely silent behind them. They turned around and he was just gone, vanished. Then they heard these unnatural noises, and when they finally found Eddie, he was in pieces. And here's the unsettling part. They swore they hadn't heard anything prior to Eddie disappearing. Not a single noise. That's what didn't sit right with me. The forest is never that quiet. Something able to do this level of damage and leave no trace shouldn't have been able to sneak up on anyone like that. I radioed back to the station requesting assistance, but I left out the grisly details over the airwaves. No need to stir up panic quite yet. We decided to start hiking back toward the station, the floor-shaken hunters and me keeping Eddie's body wrapped in a tarp for transport. But the forest felt different now. Something was off. I had spent enough time out here to know when the woods got unnaturally still, and at that moment they were practically holding their breath. An hour into our trek, Clyde was the first to hear it. A strange clicking noise echoing through the trees around us. Not the typical sounds insects make, but something deeper, almost like bones grinding together. We froze eyes, scanning the dense foliage. My hand instinctively went to my sidearm, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. Whatever was out there, it wasn't something I'd ever dealt with before. Clyde whispered that the sound was getting closer or louder. One of the other hunters, a guy named Wendell, pointed toward a large pine tree and mouthed something I couldn't quite make out. I followed his gaze and saw it. A figure crouched low against the bark, nearly blending in with the forest itself. At a glance, it resembled a deer, but not. Something was wrong. Its limbs were too long, bones jutting out at unnatural angles, and the antlers, they were massive, but twisted in ways that defied reason. Almost as if they were fused to the creature's skull. Its patchy fur didn't conceal the grotesquely human-like face peering out at us. I blinked hard, trying to will the monstrous sight to disappear, but no, it remained, observing us with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. No animal I knew could possibly move the way this thing did. Clyde wore the same wide-eyed expression of dawning horror. Before I could even begin to formulate a plan, the creature darted into motion, not directly at us, but circling, moving so fast it was a blur between the trees. I shouted for everyone to stay together, but Wendell panicked. He broke formation, sprinting off in the opposite direction, and within seconds that thing was on him. I barely had time to draw my gun before Wendell's blood-curdling scream pierced the air. His body was yanked up as easily as a rag doll, and then, just like that, he was gone, taken. There was no time to process it. The others turned and ran, crashing through the brush, and I had no choice but to follow. My heart pounded against my ribcage as we fled that awful clicking sound. Never far behind, we didn't stop running until we hit the creek bed near the old ranger station. Chests heaving, sweat soaked and shaking, Clyde looked like he might keel over at any second. His face was still that ashen shade of pale. But there was no time to rest. Whatever that monstrosity in the forest was, it wasn't done with us yet. I could hear it in the distance, the unnerving clicking growing louder again. This was no longer a chase. The thing was stalking us, toying with us, letting us tire ourselves out. We stumbled into the dilapidated station and slammed the door behind us, our hands trembling as we engaged the feeble lock. The building was showing its age, and I doubted it could keep out a determined raccoon, let alone the nightmarish creature haunting us. Clyde slid down the wall to the floor, muttering under his breath, utterly convinced we're all dead men. I tried the radio again, desperate for help, but the static drowned out any hope of response. For a fleeting moment, I considered making a break for the emergency satellite phone in the supply shed 50 yards behind the station. But one look at the others' terrified faces told me no one was volunteering to step foot outside again anytime soon. Instead, we sat in tense silence, shotguns clutched in white-knuckled grips, startling in every creak and groan of the old wood around us. The creature circled the building, dragging its elongated limbs across the outer walls, occasionally scraping at the windows with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. I couldn't bring myself to look, certain that if I did, I'd see that twisted human face leering back at me. Hours crawled by, though it felt like an eternity. We barely breathed, straining to hear over the hammering of our own hearts, praying that the scratching and clicking would cease, that the thing would lose interest and move on. Finally, after what seemed like half the night, the forest fell still. Once more, the oppressive quiet felt almost like a physical presence. For one hesitantly optimistic moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd gotten lucky that we were safe. But Clyde shook his head vehemently, his bloodshot eyes wide and haunted. He insisted he could still feel it out there, watching, waiting. I opened my mouth to offer some thin reassurance when a new sound crackled from the radio at my hip, barely audible through the white noise. A woman's voice, calm and clear, calling my name, telling me to meet her at the creek, that she knew what was happening, that she had answers. I didn't recognize the voice, but something about it pulled me to my feet before I could question it further. Clyde reached out to stop me, his fingers digging into my arm with bruising force. But I shook him off. I needed information, needed to understand, and whoever this mystery woman was, she claimed to have it. I stepped out into the night, Clyde's desperate pleas fading behind me as I made my way down to the water's edge on shaky legs. But there was no one waiting for me, just the burbling of the creek and the hum of insects, as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. I should have turned back then, should have realized I'd been lured out, separated from the relative safety of the group. But I felt an inexplicable pull, an invisible thread tugging me deeper into the trees, overriding all rationality and self-preservation. Each leaden step took me further from the station, from any chance of help or backup. The hairs on my arms stood at attention, that primal sixth sense screaming that I wasn't alone out here. And then I saw it. Wendell, or rather what remained of him. The creature had left his body displayed in the center of a small clearing, like some sort of macabre art installation. He was barely recognizable, more pulped meat and splintered bone than man. Bile seared the back of my throat, my mind reeling, trying to reconcile the gruesome scene with reality. This close, I could see the wounds more clearly in the moonlight. They were vicious, yes, but there was an almost surgical precision to them, as if the creature had dissected Wendell. It struck me then an icy revelation that sent my pulse skyrocketing. This wasn't just a hunt, it was a message, a taunt. The thing was showing us what it was capable of, that it saw us as nothing more than playthings to be broken and discarded at its leisure. I should have run then before it was too late. But shock rooted me to the spot, some stubborn part of my brain still frantically trying to apply logic to the illogical. And that hesitation cost me everything. A branch snapped behind me and I spun, fumbling for my pistol. The creature emerged from the shadows as if birthed by them, its two long arms nearly brushing the forest floor as it stalked forward. And it was smiling. I swear on everything holy that abomination wore a smile, a perverse mimicry of human expression that didn't belong on any earthly face. It didn't charge or snarl, it simply watched me with an almost curious tilt of its head, like a cat toying with a cornered mouse. I knew then, with a soul-deep certainty, that I wasn't making it out of these woods alive, that this thing, whatever it was, had marked me, had chosen me. In one last futile act of defiance, I raised my gun and fired. The shots rang out, deafening in the oppressive silence, and I watched in dawning horror as the bullets found their mark and did nothing. The creature jerked and twitched as they tore through its unnatural flesh, but it didn't fall, didn't even slow. Instead, it unfurled to its full height, towering over me, and I saw its wounds knitting back together before my eyes. Realized with sinking dread that I hadn't even managed to truly hurt it. Pain, it seemed, was a foreign concept to this beast. With a deliberate, almost leisurely gait, it closed the distance between us. I scrambled back, tripping over exposed roots, my gun falling from numb fingers. This was it. This was how I died. Alone in the dark, at the hands of a monster straight out of mankind's deepest, most primal nightmares. A blur of motion in my periphery, a shout of rage and terror. Clyde burst into the clearing like a man possessed, swinging a fire axe in a wild arc. The rusted blade bit deep into the creature's neck, like Ichura spraying across the leaves. For a single breathless moment, I thought it might be enough. That Clyde's desperate attack had found some hidden weakness. But the thing simply reached up with one spindly hand, wrenched the axe free, and tossed it aside as easily as a child discarding a toy. It rounded on Clyde, its movements jerky and uncoordinated now, but no less horrifyingly fast. He never stood a chance. On the watch, paralyzed by a fear beyond anything I'd ever known. As it tore into him with a savagery that defied description, his screams seemed to go on forever, even after I knew he must be dead, echoing inside my head long after his ruined body hit the ground. The creature turned back to me, its grotesque face split in a parody of a grin, gore dripping from its elongated jaws. I wanted to close my eyes to shut out the sight of my own impending death, but I couldn't look away, hypnotized by the depthless void of its gaze. He took a step toward me, then another, unhurried, savoring my terror. And then, between one blink and the next, it was gone, melted back into the shadows as if it had never been there at all, leaving me alone with the ragged sound of my own breathing and the copper stench of spilled blood. I don't know how long I knelt there in the dirt, waiting for it to come back and finish what it started. Seconds, minutes, hours. Time lost all meaning in the aftermath. Eventually I realized, distantly, that dawn was lightening the sky, that the forest was coming alive with the sounds of a new day, uncaring of the horrors that had unfolded in its depths. It took every ounce of my remaining strength to make it back to the station on wooden legs to call it in. I don't remember the words. I used only the hoarse scrape of my own voice, the tremor in my hands as they clenched and unclenched on the radio. When help arrived in the form of grim-faced state troopers and EMTs, I repeated the story in a flat, affectless tone. Hunting, accident, animal attack. The phrases fell from my lips by rote, even as my mind screamed the truth. They didn't press for more details. I think on some level they knew I couldn't give them the answers they wanted, that whatever had happened out there, it was beyond the scope of any formal report or investigation. In the end, they chalked it up to a tragic encounter with an unknown predator, packed up the bodies or what was left of them, and shipped them off to the coroner. I handed over my badge and my gun, and no one tried to stop me. I think they were relieved in a way. It was easier to let sleeping dogs lie, to pretend that the world still made sense, that there weren't things lurking in the shadows that defied all logic and reason. I left Kasachi that same day, the weight of 3 deaths heavy on my soul. I told myself I was done with the forest, with the secrets it kept, that I'd find a nice safe desk job and try to forget I'd ever set foot in those godforsaken woods. But I know deep down that I would never truly escape that. The memory of that thing, that twisted abomination wearing a mockery of a human face, would haunt me until my dying day, because in that last moment when it had looked into my eyes, I'd seen something else. Not just hunger or malice, but a glimmer of something far worse, something ancient and knowing, as old as the forest itself. And it let me live, let me walk away, because it wasn't done with me. I was marked now a pawn in a game I didn't yet understand, and one day I knew with a bone-deep certainty it would come for me again. And when it did, there would be no escape, no mercy. But that is a story for another time. For now I carry on, one day at a time, jumping at shadows and sleeping with the lights on, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the nightmare to come calling once more. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, as I tried to find my footing in a world that felt irrevocably changed. I went through the motions of normal life, waking, working, sleeping, but it was all just a flimsy facade, a desperate attempt to pretend that everything was fine, that I was fine. But the truth was, I was far from it. The memories of that night in the forest, of the things I'd seen and the friends I'd lost, haunted my every waking moment. I saw their faces in every crowd, heard their screams in every silence, and always the shadow of that creature loomed large in my mind. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I'd left Kasachi and its horrors behind me, but deep down I knew better. I could feel it like a physical presence, the weight of its gaze on the back of my neck, watching, waiting. I threw myself into research, scouring every obscure tome and crumbling manuscript I could get my hands on for any scrap of information about what I'd encountered. But there was frustratingly little to go on, vague mentions of forest spirits and ancient entities, of beings that walk the line between the natural and the supernatural. Nothing concrete, nothing that could help me understand or prepare for what I knew was coming. The paranoia began to set in, a constant companion that shadowed my every step. I jumped at every creak and groan, every rustling leaf and snapping twig. Sleep became a distant memory, my nights haunted by twisted visions of 2 long limbs and eyes that glinted with malevolent intelligence. I pored over ancient texts and forgotten lore, seeking any mention of creatures that matched the description of the thing I'd encountered in the woods. Beings that blurred the boundaries between animal and man, between the mundane and the mystical. The scraps I found were maddeningly vague, hinting at old gods and forest guardians. These that had walked the earth long before humanity's ancestors crawled from the primordial ooze. Entities worshipped and feared in equal measure by cultures long since lost to the sands of time. But for every tantalizing hint, there were a dozen dead ends, myths and legends that crumbled to dust when subjected to the cold light of reason. I began to doubt my own sanity, wondering if the horrors I'd witnessed had been nothing more than the product of an overtaxed mind, a waking nightmare born of grief and trauma. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was out there biding its time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I became a ghost, haunting the stacks of dusty libraries and dimly lit occult shops, chasing down every whisper and rumor. My friends and family watched helplessly as I withdrew further into myself, consumed by my obsession. They couldn't understand and I couldn't explain. How could I tell them that I had seen the face of true evil, that I had looked into the abyss and felt it look back? So I soldiered on alone, my quest for answers, driven by equal parts desperation and dread. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the marrow that my time was running out, that the creature would come for me again, and when it did, I needed to be ready. But how does one prepare for the unimaginable? How does one steel oneself against a horror that defies all natural law? These were the questions that plagued me day and night as I delved ever deeper into the shadows. And then just when I thought I could go no further, when the weight of my own fears threatened to crush me, I stumbled upon a lead, a crumbling leather-bound journal tucked away in a forgotten corner of a university library. Its pages were brittle with age. The journal spoke of a place, a remote village nestled deep in the heart of the bayou, where the old ways still held sway. A place whispered about in hushed tones by the locals, where strange lights danced in the swamp at night and the trees seemed to have eyes. It was there that the journal claimed one might find answers, learn the true nature of the creature that stalked the woods, and perhaps, if they were very lucky, how to stop it. I knew as I read those faded words that I had no choice. This was the path I'd been set upon, the road I must walk, no matter where it led. And so, with a heavy heart and a sense of grim determination, I set out for the bayou. Little did I know as I made my preparations and said my goodbyes that I was walking into a nightmare far deeper and more twisted than anything I could have imagined. The secrets I sought would come at a price higher than any man should have to pay. But that, as they say, is a story for another time. For now, suffice it to say that my journey was only just beginning, and the true horrors were yet to come. The drive to the bayou was a blur, the miles disappearing beneath my wheels as if in a dream. The landscape changed gradually, the ordered sprawl of the city giving way to tangled wilderness, twisting roads winding through dense thickets of cypress and Spanish moss. I felt the weight of the place pressing down on me as I drove, a sense of ancient stillness, of secrets long buried. The air itself seemed thicker, somehow laden with the cloying scent of decay and damp earth. By the time I reached the village, night had fallen, cloaking the world in shadows. The settlement was little more than a handful of ramshackle buildings clustered around a single dirt road, their weathered facades seeming to lean together as if in shared secrecy. I parked on the outskirts, the engine ticking softly as it cooled, and stepped out into the humid darkness. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of insects and the occasional splash of something unseen in the nearby swamp. I made my way into the heart of the village, where footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the packed earth. There was no sign of life, no light in the windows or smoke from the chimneys. It was as if the entire place was holding its breath, waiting for something. And then I saw it rising from the center of the village like a malevolent sentinel, a massive tree with its trunk twisted and gnarled, its branches reaching up to claw at the star-strewn sky. There was something about it that set my teeth on edge and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. As I drew closer, I saw that the tree was adorned with strange totems and fetishes, bits of bone and tattered cloth fluttering in the breeze, and at its base was a symbol carved into the bark, a symbol I recognized from the journal, the mark of the creature. I stood there for a long moment, transfixed by the sight, a creeping sense of dread settling in the pit of my stomach. I knew with certainty that went beyond reason that I was in the presence of something ancient and powerful, something that had watched humanity's struggles with cold indifference for eons. Then from the shadows at the edge of the village, a figure emerged. An old woman stooped and weathered, her eyes glinting in the moonlight, with a knowing look that sent a shiver down my spine. She beckoned to me, her gnarled fingers curling in a gesture of invitation, and I found myself moving forward as if in a trance, drawn by a force I couldn't name. As I drew level with her, she spoke in a rasping whisper that seemed to come from the very earth itself. "You've come far, child," she said, her gaze boring into mine, searching to find that which haunted you. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry, my words sticking in my throat. She smiled then, a thin, humorless thing that didn't reach her eyes. "The spirit of the forest," she intoned. "The guardian of the green. You've seen it. Haven't you looked upon its true face?" I could only nod again, the memory of that twisted visage rising unbidden in my mind's eye. The old woman regarded me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "It is a dangerous thing to attract its attention," she said at last. "To be marked by its gaze. Marked." I managed to croak my voice, sounding small and insignificant in the vastness of the night. The woman's smile widened, becoming something predatory. "Oh yes," she whispered. "It has tasted your fear, your desperation. It will not rest until it has consumed you utterly." A chill ran through me at her words, a bone-deep terror that threatened to overwhelm me. "How do I stop it?" I asked, hating the pleading note in my voice. "How do I make it leave me alone?" The old woman regarded me for a long moment, her eyes seeming to see straight through me. "There is a way," she said at last, her voice low and laden with meaning. "A ritual passed down through generations. A way to appease the spirit, to offer it a different prey." I felt a flicker of hope, then a desperate clawing thing that burned in my chest. "Tell me," I urged. "Please. I'll do anything." She nodded slowly, as if she'd expected no less. "The ritual must be performed in the dark of the moon," she intoned. "When the vow between worlds is thinnest, you must bring an offering, a life given freely in exchange for your own." I recoiled at her words, a wave of nausea washing over me. "A life?" I whispered, horrified. "You mean I have to kill someone?" The old woman shrugged, as if the question was of no consequence. "The spirit demands blood," she said simply. "Without it, there can be no bargain." I stood there for a long moment, my mind reeling, trying to process the enormity of what she was asking, to take a life, an innocent life, in cold blood. It went against everything I'd ever believed, every principle I'd ever held dear. And yet, what choice did I have? The alternative was a fate worse than death. An eternity spent in the clutches of a monster beyond imagining, slowly hating myself with every fiber of my being. I nodded. The old woman smiled again. A cruel, satisfied thing. "God," she whispered, "you will return here when the moon is dark. Bring your offering and I will guide you in the ritual." With that, she turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of my own damnation. I stumbled back to my car in a daze, my mind whirling with the implications of what I'd just agreed to. I knew deep in my bones that I was crossing a line from which there could be no return, that the price of my salvation would be paid in innocent blood. But what other path was there? What other hope did I have of escaping the nightmare that had consumed my life? As I started the engine and pulled away from the village, a grim resolve settled over me. I would do what needed to be done. I would make the sacrifice and pray it would be enough. And if not, if the ritual failed and the creature claimed me anyway, at least I would have tried, at least I would have fought until the very end. With that thought ringing in my mind, I drove on into the night, the road stretching out before me like a ribbon of darkness, leading me ever deeper into the heart of the bayou, and the horror that awaited me there. The days leading up to the dark of the moon were a blur of feverish activity and gnawing dread. I moved through the world like a ghost, my thoughts consumed by the looming specter of what I was about to do. I made my preparations with a sort of detached efficiency, gathering the materials I would need for the ritual, scouting out secluded spots in the bayou where I could carry out the grim work without fear of interruption. And always, the question of my victim haunted me. Who would it be? Some faceless drifter lured in by the promise of easy money or a warm bed for the night? A hitchhiker plucked from the side of the road, never to be seen again. I told myself that it didn't matter. Whoever I chose, their life was forfeit. The moment the creature had marked me, their death would be a mercy compared to the fate that awaited me if I failed. But still, the guilt gnawed at me, a constant companion in the long hours of the night. I saw their faces in my dreams, heard their screams echoing in the silence of my thoughts, and always the question, was I truly prepared to go through with it, to cross that final irrevocable line? As the moon waned and the day of the ritual drew near, I felt myself slipping further and further into a kind of numb desperation. I mobbed through the motions of my life like an automaton, smiling and nodding at the appropriate moments, all the while feeling as though I was watching myself from a great distance. And then the night was upon me. I drove out to the bayou as if in a trance, the old woman's instructions ringing in my ears. I had my offering, a young man, barely more than a boy, really. I found him at a truck stop on the edge of town. A runaway with haunted eyes and a desperate air. It had been almost too easy to lure him into my car to spin a tale of a job waiting for him in the next town over. He'd hesitated for only a moment before climbing in, his wordless gratitude hanging heavy in the air between us. Now, as I dragged his unconscious form from the trunk of my car, the weight of what I was about to do crashed over me like a wave. I stood there for a long moment, staring down at his slack face, his chest rising and falling gently in the moonlight. Could I really do this? Could I take this innocent life, snuff it out like a candle flame, all for the slim chance of saving my own skin? In that moment, I wavered. I felt the first stirrings of doubt, of horror at what I had become, and for a single breathless instant I almost turned back, almost threw the boy in my car and drove away. Consequences be damned. But then the memory of the creature's eyes, its twisted, leering grin, rose up in my mind like a specter, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that there could be no turning back, that this was my only chance, my only hope of salvation. With a heavy heart and shaking hands, I gathered up the boy's limp form and carried him into the depths of the swamp to the place the old woman had shown me. There, at the base of a gnarled cypress tree, I laid him out like a sacrifice, his pale skin seeming to glow in the sickly light of the moon. I began the ritual, my voice trembling as I intoned the ancient words, the syllables thick and heavy on my tongue. I felt the air around me grow heavy, charged with a palpable sense of malevolence. And then, as I raised the blade above the boy's chest, I felt it. A presence, ancient and cruel, watching from the shadows, waiting with a hunger that made my blood run cold. I knew then with a certainty that stole the breath from my lungs that the creature was here, that it had been waiting for me all this time, waiting for me to seal my own damnation. And in that moment, as the knife hovered over the boy's heart, I hesitated. I looked down at his face, so young, so innocent, and I knew with a sudden blinding clarity that I couldn't do it. And no matter the cost to myself, I could not take this life. With a cry of anguish, I flung the blade away, sending it spinning into the darkness. And as I did, I felt the creature's rage, its howl of fury echoing through the swamp like a physical force. I threw myself over the boy's body, shielding him with my own as the thing descended upon us in a whirlwind of teeth and claws. I felt its hot breath on my face, smelled the fetid stench of its rotting flesh, and I knew with a grim certainty that my fate was sealed. But even as the creature tore into me, even as I felt my life slipping away in a haze of blood and agony, I felt a flicker of something else, a sense of peace, of rightness, the knowledge that in the end, I had made the only choice I could. As my vision faded and the darkness closed in, I heard the boy stir beneath me, his eyes fluttering open in confusion and fear. And with my last breath, I whispered to him the only truth I had left to give. "Run!" I rasped my voice, a thin, reedy thing. "Run and don't look back. Whatever you do, don't let it catch you. Don't let it make you like me." And then the void took me and I knew no more. I awoke to a world of mist and shadow, my body a distant throbbing ache. For a long moment I lay there, disoriented, trying to piece together the fragmented memories of what had happened. And then, like a dam breaking, it all came rushing back. The ritual, the boy, the creature's fury as I denied it its prize. I sat up with a gasp, my hands flying to my chest, expecting to find torn flesh and shattered bone. But there was nothing, no wounds, no scars, not even the slightest twinge of pain. I stared down at myself in confusion, my mind racing. How was this possible? I had felt the creature's claws, its teeth. I had felt my life slipping away, my blood soaking the earth beneath me. And yet here I was, whole and unharmed, as if it had all been nothing more than a vivid nightmare. I climbed to my feet, my legs shaky beneath me, and looked around, trying to get my bearings. I was still in the swamp, that much was clear. But it was different now. The colors muted and strange, the air thick with another worldly haze. And there in the distance I saw it, a light flickering and dim, beckoning me through the mist. I hesitated for only a moment before setting off towards it, drawn by a force I couldn't name. As I walked, the landscape around me continued to morph and change in unsettling ways. The trees that loomed on either side of me seemed to twist and writhe their branches, contorting into unnatural, almost grotesque shapes. It was as if they were alive, possessed by some dark and malevolent force that caused them to strain towards me with grasping, claw-like limbs. The very ground beneath my feet felt wrong as well. Where before there had been solid earth, now there was a spongy, almost organic quality to the terrain. Each step I took made the ground yield and shift, like I was walking on the surface of some gigantic, putrid creature. The sensation was deeply unnerving, adding to the overall sense of wrongness that pervaded this strange liminal space. And yet, despite the horrors that surrounded me, I found I couldn't tear my gaze away from the light that glimmered in the distance. It shone like a beacon, cutting through the swirling mists and flickering shadows, drawing me onwards with an almost magnetic pull. With each passing step, it grew brighter and more distinct, resolving into a shimmering, pulsing glow that seemed to promise safety or at least answers. If only I could reach it. I pressed on, ignoring the way the twisted vegetation seemed to grasp at me as I passed, ignoring the queasiness that roiled in my gut with each squelching step. My entire being was focused on that distant light, on the hope that it represented. As I drew closer, I could make out more details. The light seemed to be emanating from a circular clearing just ahead, ringed by towering trees that swayed and danced like worshippers around a pagan bonfire. In the center of the clearing was a shape, an altar or plinth of some kind, from which the light was radiating outward. I stepped into the clearing and my breath caught in my throat. Up close, the altar was even stranger than I had first thought. It seemed to be made of some kind of pulsing, fleshy substance that throbbed in time with the flickering light. Veins of glowing energy ran through it, casting eerie shadows across the clearing. And there atop the altar was a shape that made my heart seize in my chest. It was the creature, or at least a representation of it. The statue or idol carved from some dark, glistening stone that seemed to drink in the light around it. The statue depicted the creature in all its horrific glory. Its elongated limbs and twisted antlered head were captured in loving, awful detail. But it was the eyes that held me transfixed. Two orbs of swirling hypnotic energy that seemed to bore into my very soul. As I stared into those eyes, I felt a sudden wrenching sensation. as if a hook had been plunged into my navel and was yanking me forward. The world around me blurred and spun, the colors bleeding together into a sickening kaleidoscope. And then, with a final wrenching jolt, I found myself standing once more in the clearing. But now everything had changed. The trees, the altar, the statue, all were gone, replaced by a featureless gray expanse that stretched out in all directions like the surface of some dead, forgotten moon. And there, standing before me, was a figure, tall and gaunt, clad in robes of deepest black. It regarded me with eyes that glinted like chips of obsidian. When it spoke, its voice was a rasping whisper that seemed to echo from the depths of some long-forgotten tune. "Welcome," it said, its thin lips curling into a smile that held no warmth. "Welcome to the place between worlds, where all truths are laid bare and all debts are paid." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. I could only stare at the figure before me, my mind reeling with questions and fears. The figure chuckled a dry, rattling sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "You have many questions," it said, "and well you should, for you stand now at the threshold of a great and terrible knowledge." It gestured around us at the featureless expanse. This place is a crossroads, a nexus between the world you know and the worlds that lie beyond. It is a place of power and of choice. The figure took a step towards me, its robes whispering against the ground. "You denied the creature its prize," it said. "It chose mercy over your own survival. That choice has brought you here to this moment." I found my voice at last, though it was little more than a croak. "What? What happens now?" The figure spread its hands. "Now you must choose again. The creature still hunts you, still craves your flesh and your fear. You may return to your world and face it once more, where it paused its eyes boring into mine. Or you may remain here. You may take up the mantle of the Guardian and stand watch over the boundary between worlds. You may ensure that no other suffers as you have suffered." I stared at the figure, my mind whirling. To go back to face the creature again? The thought filled me with a terror so deep and primal that it threatened to overwhelm me. But to stay here in this strange, liminal place, cut off from everything and everyone I had ever known. "If I stay," I said, my voice trembling, "if I become the Guardian, will I ever be able to return to see my loved ones again?" The figure was silent for a long moment. "No," it said at last, "that is the price of the mantle. You will watch over the boundary for eternity, never again to walk among the living." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on me. In my mind's eye, I saw the boy's face, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. I saw the old woman's knowing smile and heard her words echoing in my ears. "You have been marked. The creature will never stop hunting you." In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I opened my eyes and met the figure's gaze. "He'll stay," I said, my voice steady. "He'll become the Guardian." The figure nodded as if it had known all along what my choice would be. "Then it is done," it said. "From this moment forth, you are the watcher on the threshold, the keeper of the boundary. May your vigil be long and your purpose true." As the words left my lips, I felt a change come over me, a sense of power and purpose flowing into my limbs like molten metal. I stood straighter, taller, my eyes shining with a new and ancient light. And then the figure was gone, and I was alone in the gray expanse. No, not alone, for I could feel them now, the countless souls that walked the boundary, the lost and the weary, the hunted and the haunted. They were my charge, now my responsibility, and I would not fail them. I would stand watch for as long as it took, until the stars themselves burned out and the worlds crumbled to dust, for I was the Guardian and this was my solemn duty. Time passed differently in the gray expanse. I soon learned that days, months, years blurred together in an endless, featureless haze. And yet, I did not age, or hunger or tire. I simply was a constant presence on the threshold between worlds. I walked the boundary, my senses attuned to the ebb and flow of the energies that swirled around me. I could feel the creature's presence, always lurking just beyond the veil. Its hunger, a palpable force that pressed against the barrier, but it could not cross nor reach me here. The power that had been granted to me held it at bay, kept it confined to the shattered realm, which was its home. And so I walked and watched and waited, my mind filled with the weight of my responsibility. I saw them sometimes, the souls that wandered too close to the edge, drawn by the siren call of the worlds beyond. Lost broken things, their eyes hollow and their hearts heavy with despair. To them I offered what comfort I could, a word of guidance, a gentle touch, a reminder that they were not alone. Some heeded me, turning back to the light with renewed purpose. Others were too far gone, too consumed by their own darkness. These I could not save, though. It tore at me to watch them slip away, drawn inexorably into the hungering maw of the creature's realm. But such was the nature of my duty, to guard and to guide, but never to interfere with the choices of the living. And so I walked, a lonely figure in a world of mist and shadow. The faces of those I had left behind, the boy Clyde, even the old woman, faded from my memory, replaced by the endless procession of souls that passed beneath my watchful gaze. Until one day, something changed. I felt it before, I saw it, a ripple in the fabric of the boundary, a disturbance in the flow of energy. I turned, my senses straining, and there, in the distance, I saw a figure approaching. At first, I thought it was another lost soul, another weary wanderer seeking solace or release. But as it drew closer, I realized my mistake. This was no mere mortal, no fragile being of flesh and blood. It was the creature, or at least a part of it, a projection, a manifestation of its power and its will. It stood before me, its form flickering and indistinct, like a heat haze given nightmarish shape. Guardian, it hissed its voice, a sibilant whisper that crawled across my skin like 1,000 skittering insects. You have denied me for too long. You have kept me from my rightful prey. I stood my ground, my power flaring around me in a shimmering aura. I have done my duty, I said, my voice ringing with a strength I did not feel. I have protected the innocent from your hunger. I will not yield. The creature laughed, a sound like the cracking of ancient bones. Foolish little mote. It said, you think you can stand against me. You think your pitiful power can hold me at bay forever. It took a step forward, its form solidifying, becoming more real with each passing moment. I offer you a choice, Guardian. Stand aside and let me pass. Let not have the souls that are rightfully mine or face the consequences of your defiance. I could feel the weight of its power pressing down on me, the sheer, terrifying magnitude of its hunger. It would be so easy, I knew, to give in, to step aside and let it pass, to surrender my charge and my purpose. But I had made a promise, a vow that bound me more surely than any earthly chain. I had sworn to protect the innocent, to stand as a bulwark against the darkness. And I would not forsake that oath, not even in the face of annihilation. No, I said, my voice, a whisper that carried the weight of mountains. I will not yield, not now, not ever. If you want the souls in my care, you will have to go through me. The creature snarled, its form rippling and twisting with rage. So be it, it hissed. The mon will die, Guardian, and your precious words will follow you into oblivion. It lunged forward, its claws raking the air inches from my face. I felt the searing heat of its breath, smelled the fetid stench of its corruption, but I did not flinch or falter. Instead, I reached deep within myself, tapping into the wellspring of power that had been granted to me so long ago. I felt it surge through me, a white-hot torrent of energy that filled me to bursting, and then with a roar that shook the very foundations of the worlds, I unleashed it. The creature reeled back, its form shattering like glass under the onslaught of my power. It held in agony and rage. its voice a discordant symphony of pain and fury. But I did not relent. I pressed forward, pouring every ounce of my strength into the attack. I could feel the boundary between worlds buckling and straining under the force of our clash. I could feel the very fabric of reality beginning to unravel. And still I pushed, driven by a resolve I had not known I possessed, for the souls in my care. While Boy and all the others like him, I would not fail. I would not falter. With a final wrenching cry, the creature broke its form, dissolving into 1,000 shards of shadow. It fled, howling back into the depths of its realm, its power broken and its hunger thwarted. I sank to my knees, my strength spent, my body trembled with the aftershocks of the battle. But even as I knelt there, gasping for breath, I felt a sense of triumph, of vindication. I had faced the creature and had emerged victorious. I had proven myself worthy of the mantle I bore, of the trust that had been placed in me. And though I knew that the creature would return, that it would never truly be defeated, I also knew that I would be ready, standing as I had always stood, as a guardian on the threshold, for that was my purpose, my calling. And I would not rest until it was fulfilled. In the aftermath of my battle with the creature, I found myself changed once more. The power that had flowed through me, the raw, unchecked energy of the boundary, had left its mark upon my very being. I could feel it throbbing beneath my skin, a constant, pulsing reminder of my true nature. No longer was I a mere mortal bound by the limitations of flesh and blood. I was something more, something greater, a true guardian in both name and essence. With this newfound strength came a clarity of purpose, a singular focus that drove me forward. I threw myself into my duties with renewed vigor, patrolling the boundary with diligence bordering on obsession. I became a fixture of the gray expanse, a constant presence that the lost and the weary came to seek out. To them I was a beacon of hope, a guiding light in the darkness of their despair. And I reveled in it, knowing that I was making a difference, fulfilling the purpose for which I had been chosen. But even as I embraced my role and poured myself into the task of guardianship, I couldn't shake the nagging sense that something was amiss. A feeling of unease, of impending doom that lurked at the edges of my consciousness like a gathering storm. It was the creature I knew, though it had been defeated, its power broken, yet it wasn't gone. It lurked still in the shadows of its realm, nursing its wounds and plotting its revenge. It was biding its time, waiting for the moment to strike. I could feel its malice, its hatred, seeping through the boundary like a noxious miasma, and I knew with certainty that chilled me to my very core that when that moment came, I would be the one to face it, and the fate of all the souls in my care, of all the worlds that balanced on the knife's edge of the boundary, would rest upon my shoulders. It was a heavy burden, a responsibility that threatened to crush me beneath its weight. But I bore it gladly, knowing that there was no one else who could, and so I waited and watched and prepared myself for the battle to come. I honed my powers, sharpening them to a razor's edge, until I felt as though I could cut through the very fabric of reality itself. And with each passing day, each new revelation, I felt myself growing stronger, more certain of my purpose, until finally the day came, the day I had been both dreading and anticipating for longer than I could remember. I delved deep into the mysteries of the boundary, seeking out the hidden knowledge that had been denied to me for so long. I felt it before I saw it, a ripple in the fabric of the worlds that set my teeth on edge and my heart racing. A sense of wrongness, of discordance that permeated the very air around me. It had fed, I realized, gorging itself on the fear and despair of countless souls until it had become a thing of pure, unbridled malevolence. And then there it was, the creature in all its terrible glory, rising up from the depths of its realm like a nightmare made flesh. I was different than before. I saw stronger, more vital its form, pulsing with a dark and terrible energy. But I was different too. I had grown, had evolved, had become something more than I ever could have imagined. And as I faced the creature, as I stared into the abyss of its hunger, I felt no fear, only a grim, unyielding determination. "You cannot have them," I said, my voice ringing out across the expanse like a clarion call. "The souls in my care are under my protection now and forever. You will not touch them." "Foolish guardian," it hissed. "You think you can stand against me? You think your pitiful power is a match for mine?" The creature laughed, a sound like the shattering of 1,000 mirrors. Beneath its implacable weight, its darkness swirled around me, probing at my defenses, seeking the tiniest crack or flaw through which to pour its malevolence. It raised a hand, and I felt the force of its will pressing down upon me. The creature's power crashed over me like a tidal wave, a crushing force that sought to grind me into dust. But I stood firm, a rock against the tide, my own power rising up to meet it. The energies of the boundary surged through me, a brilliant, searing light that burned away the shadows and forced the creature back. "You're right," I said, my voice steady and clear despite the maelstrom raging around us. "I am no match for you, not alone, but I am not alone." I felt them there, waiting on the other side of the veil, their hopes and dreams, their love and courage, a shining beacon in the darkness. I reached out with my mind, with my very essence, to all the souls I had sworn to protect. "These souls," I cried, "are more than just my wards. They are my strength, my sword and shield against the likes of you, and together we will cast you back into the abyss." I unleashed the full might of my power then, a blinding surge of energy that merged with the radiant force emanating from the souls behind me. The creature screamed as our combined light pierced its shadowy form, burning away its substance like mist before the rising sun. But there was nowhere for it to hide, no shadow deep enough to offer shelter from the cleansing fire. "Go back," I commanded, my voice thunder and fury, "back to the pit that spawned you and troubled these souls." It writhed and thrashed its claws, raking furrows in the gray expanse as it sought to escape the searing torment of our onslaught. No more. With a final agonized howl, the creature dissipated, its form shredding apart like a tattered banner caught in a gale. The wisps of its being scattered to the ethereal winds until not a trace remained, tossing mark its way. I stood in the sudden silence, my chest heaving, my body trembling with the aftershocks of the titanic energies I had channeled behind me. I sensed the souls slowly withdrawing their task, completed, their light dimming as they returned to their rest. But as they faded, I felt something else. A profound sense of connection, unity that transcended the boundaries of life and death. A bond forged in the crucible of shared struggle, tempered by the heat of our own resolve. I knew then with certainty that suffused my entire being that I would never be truly alone. And together we would stand eternal vigil against the darkness, a beacon of hope and courage for all the lost and weary souls that might find their way to our door. That the souls I guarded were more than just my charge. They were my kin, my reason for being. As I turned back to face the gray expanse, I felt a smile tug at the corners of my lips. The battle was over, but my watch had just begun, and I would not falter. I would not rest until the very last soul found its way to the light. Boundary settled back into its accustomed patterns in the days and years that followed. With an ebb and flow of energies, a soothing constancy to my senses, souls came and went as they always had, some lingering for a time under my protection, others passing quickly through to whatever destiny awaited them beyond. But something had changed. There was a fundamental shift in the very fabric of my existence. Where once my role as guardian had felt like a solemn duty, a sacred trust placed upon me by powers beyond my ken, now it felt like a joyous privilege. Each soul that passed through my domain was a precious gift, a shining fragment of the vast and ineffable tapestry of life, and each one left an indelible mark upon me, a memory cherished and held close through the long, lonely watches of eternity. Perhaps it had been truly destroyed, its essence scattered to the cosmic winds, never to coalesce again. I never saw the creature again, never felt the stain of its malice darken the threshold of my realm. Or perhaps it simply knew better than to challenge me a third time, knew that I had found a strength and purpose beyond its reckoning, a power that could never be overthrown. But in truth, it mattered little, for I had found my place, my calling, and nothing could sway me from it. Not the creature, not the endless march of time, not even the siren song of the life I had left behind. For I was the guardian, the watcher on the boundary, and I would hold my post until the very stars burned out and reality itself crumbled to dust. It was a strange existence, a life unlike any I could have imagined in my mortal days. But it was mine wholly and completely, and I embraced it with all the fervor of my being. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between the passages of souls, I would let my mind wander back to the world I had known, to the sun-dappled forests and the laughing streams, to the faces of friends and loved ones I had left behind. I like to think they did, that somewhere in some quiet corner of their hearts they held a space for the man I had been, a man who had given his life, his very existence, to keep them safe from the horrors that lurked in the shadows. I wondered what had become of them in the long years since I took up my vigil, wondered if they still remembered me, still thought of me from time to time. And as I stood, my eternal watch, that thought comforted me, warmed me through the long, cold nights of my guardianship. The knowledge that, even as I protected them, they too, in their own way, watched over me. A silent communion of souls, a bond unbreakable and forever. And so I remained the guardian on the threshold, the keeper of the boundary, watching and waiting until the end of all things. And through it all, I held fast to the truth that had become the cornerstone of my existence. That in the end, it was not the power we wielded or the battles we fought that defined us. I had made my choice long ago. On the blood-soaked night in a Louisiana forest, a choice to stand against the darkness, to be a light for the lost and weary. A choice that had led here to this place, this moment. It was the choices we made, the convictions we held dear, even in the face of darkness. And I knew with certainty that transcended all doubt and fear, that I would make that choice again 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways, for I was the guardian and I would hold the line now and forever. I stood on the edge of the cliff trying to catch my breath as I looked out over the vast expanse of the Allegheny Mountains. It was 1986, and I had just finished a grueling week at the steel mill. The hiking trip had been planned for months, with me, Sam, and Marcus getting away from the grind to find some peace in the wild. But this time things felt different. We'd been taking these trips since college, always chasing that perfect moment of solitude. Sam was the one who suggested we head to the less traveled parts of the Alleghenies, far from the usual trails. There's something about this place, he'd said, eyes gleaming with excitement. Untouched, we won't see another soul out there. It was a tough sell at first. Marcus wasn't too keen on straying from the known paths, and neither was I, truth be told, but Sam had a way of making things sound like the adventure of a lifetime. So we agreed. It wasn't the first time we trusted Sam's instincts, and usually it paid off. The first day was uneventful, which was exactly what we were hoping for. We hiked deep into the mountains, leaving civilization far behind. The air was crisp, and the trees thickened as we went, their branches weaving into a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. By late afternoon, we found a small clearing by a stream, the perfect spot to set up camp. It was like stepping into another world, one where time moved differently. Marcus started on the tents while Sam went off to gather firewood. I stayed by the stream, filling our canteens and soaking in the quiet. There was something about the place that gnawed at me, though. The silence was too thick, too still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Sam returned with an armful of wood, his usual grin plastered on his face. He said, dropping the logs near the fire pit, "This place is something else, huh? Not a soul for miles. It's perfect." I nodded, but the unease didn't leave me. We had been in remote places before, but there was something different here. The forest seemed alive in a way I couldn't explain, as if it was watching us wait. We We sat around the fire that night, trading stories and jokes, just like old times. Marcus, ever the skeptic, kept ribbing Sam about his perfect spot, but Sam just laughed it off. I didn't say much, just listened and kept an eye on the darkness beyond the firelight. It wasn't until the second day that things started to unravel. We woke early, planning to hike further up the mountain to get a better view. The trail was steep and treacherous, but the promise of untouched beauty kept us going. The further we climbed, the thicker the air seemed to get, pressing down on us like a weight. Around noon, we reached a plateau where the trees thinned out and the ground was covered in a soft, spongy moss. It was eerily quiet. The only sound was our heavy breathing and the crunch of our boots on the ground. Sam was leading the way when he suddenly stopped, holding up a hand to silence us. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I strained my ears but heard nothing. "What is it?" I asked, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Sam didn't answer right away. He was staring into the distance towards a cluster of trees at the far end of the plateau. Marcus, ever the pragmatist, scoffed. "It's probably just a deer or something." "There's something out there," he said finally, his voice tight with fear. But Sam wasn't convinced, and neither was I. "We're in the middle of nowhere, Sam. There's nothing out here but us." There was a tension in the air that I couldn't ignore, a feeling that something was wrong. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. We pressed on though, none of us willing to admit that we were scared. The trail became harder to follow, and the trees grew closer together, their branches tangling above us like a web. That's when we found the bones. The farther we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The bones were scattered across the trail, picked clean and bleached white by the elements. At first, we thought they were from an animal, maybe a deer or a bear. But as we moved closer, it became clear that these weren't animal bones, they were human. Marcus swore under his breath. His usual bravado was gone. Sam was silent, his face pale as he knelt down to examine the remains. "This doesn't make any sense," he muttered. "No one comes out this far. How did they—" Before he could finish, a sound echoed through the trees, low and guttural, like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was close, too close. We all froze, fear tightening around our throats like a vice. What the hell was that? Sam stood up slowly, his hand inching towards the hunting knife on his belt. Marcus whispered, his eyes wide with panic. "We need to go," he said, his voice trembling. Billy turned back the way we came, moving quickly but cautiously, every rustle of the leaves sending us into a fresh wave of terror. The forest, once serene, now felt like a predator, stalking its prey, the shadows lengthening and deepening with every step we took. At first, it was just a shape, barely visible through the trees. That's when I saw it. But as it moved closer, it became clear that this was no animal. It walked on two legs hunched over its skin, pale and stretched tight over a gaunt frame. Its face was a twisted mockery of human features, a gaping mouth filled with jagged teeth and limbs that were too long, too thin to belong to anything natural. We ran. The thing gave chase. I could hear its breathing, wet and ragged as it closed in on us. Its movements were unnaturally fast, covering ground with terrifying speed. We didn't stop to think, we didn't look back. We just ran, driven by pure animalistic fear. But Marcus wasn't fast enough. I heard him scream as he was dragged into the underbrush, his voice cutting off abruptly. Sam and I didn't stop. We couldn't. We crashed through the forest, tearing through branches and thorns, the sound of pursuit close behind. We stumbled back into the clearing by the stream, our camp still standing as if nothing had happened. But there was no time to think, no time to rest. The thing was still coming. Sam grabbed the hatchet from his pack, turning to face the direction we'd come from.
"We have to fight it," he said, his voice steady. despite the terror in his eyes.
I wanted to argue to tell him we should keep running, but I knew it was pointless. The thing burst from the trees, its mouth open in a soundless scream, its arms outstretched like claws. We couldn't outrun it, we had to stand our ground. Sam swung the hatchet, the blade biting deep into its chest. But it didn't slow down. It slammed into him, knocking him to the ground, its teeth sinking into his shoulder. I grabbed a fallen branch, swinging it with all my strength at the creature's head. It barely reacted, its focus entirely on Sam, but the blow was enough to give him a chance. He rolled free, gasping in pain. As the thing turned its attention to me, I swung again, this time catching it in the jaw. It staggered back, and in that moment Sam lunged forward with the hatchet, burying it in the creature's neck. The thing let out a high-pitched shriek, flailing wildly as it tried to pull the blade free, and then it stopped. Sam and I stood there, panting, staring at the lifeless form at our feet. The creature collapsed to the ground, its body twitching before finally going still. It didn't vanish, it didn't dissolve into the air. It was real as the blood on Sam's hands and the pain in my chest. We didn't speak as we packed up the camp, moving quickly and efficiently, the adrenaline still pumping through our veins. The body was still there when we left, lying in the dirt like a grotesque reminder of what had happened. The hike back to civilization was a blur. Neither of us said much. Our minds were too numb to process everything. When we finally reached the trailhead, it was as if a weight had been lifted from our shoulders. But the memory of what we'd seen, what we'd done, would never leave us. Sam and I were questioned, but we stuck to the story, knowing that no one would ever believe the truth. The authorities found Marcus' remains the next day along with the creature's body. It was reported as an unknown animal attack, something that defied classification. As we drove back to the city, the mountains fading into the distance, Sam looked over at me, his face pale but determined. "We did what we had to do," he said simply, and that was that. There was nothing more to say. But the incident haunted me. I couldn't stop thinking about that creature, about the way it had moved, the way it had looked. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, like something out of a nightmare. And the more I thought about it, the more questions I had. What was that thing? Where had it come from? And, most importantly, were there more of them out there? I tried to push the thoughts away and focus on my job and my life. Months passed, and slowly things started to return to normal. But the memories lingered, always there at the back of my mind. Sam and I drifted apart, each of us dealing with the trauma in our own way. It started with small things, strange noises in the night, shadows that seemed to move on their own. I threw myself into my work at the steel mill, trying to lose myself in the heat and noise, but even there I couldn't escape the feeling that something was wrong. At first I chalked it up to paranoia, to the lingering effects of what we'd been through. But then the rumors started. People were disappearing in the mountains, hikers and campers vanishing without a trace. The authorities were baffled, unable to find any clues or leads. I tried to warn people, to tell them to stay away from the Alleghenies, but no one would listen. But I knew deep down what was happening. They thought I was crazy, that the trauma had gotten to me. Even Sam didn't want to hear it. He'd moved on, or at least he was trying to, but I couldn't let it go. I started doing research, digging into the history of the area, and what I found only confirmed my worst fears. It had been stories about the creature for decades, tales passed down through generations of locals. They called it the Wendigo, a creature born of hunger and desperation, a once human thing that had turned to cannibalism to survive. And now it seemed it was back. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let more people fall victim to this thing. So I made a plan. I would go back into the mountains, back to where it had all started, and this time I would be prepared. I knew I couldn't rely on anyone else for help. I spent weeks getting ready, gathering supplies and weapons. This was something I had to do alone. As the day of my departure approached, I found myself growing more and more anxious. The thought of facing that creature again filled me with a terror I had never known before. But I couldn't back down, not now. Too many lives were at stake. On the morning of my departure, I loaded up my truck and headed out. The rising sun painted the sky a bloody red. The drive to the trailhead was long and lonely. The road wound through the mountains like a serpent. It felt like an omen, a warning of what was to come. As I got closer, I could feel the weight of the past pressing down on me, memories of that fateful trip flooding back. I parked my truck at the trailhead and shouldered my pack. The weapons I had brought felt heavy and unfamiliar in my hands. I'd never been much of a hunter, but I knew I would need every advantage I could get. The hike up the mountain was grueling. The trail seemed to stretch on forever. With every step, I could feel the presence of the creature growing stronger, like a dark cloud hanging over the forest. By the time I reached the plateau where we had found the bones, the sun was already starting to set. The shadows lengthened across the ground. I set up camp quickly, my hands shaking as I built a fire. I knew I wouldn't sleep much that night, but with the knowledge of what was out there. As darkness fell, I sat by the fire, my eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. It was nearly midnight when I heard it, the same low, guttural sound that had haunted my dreams for months. My heart leapt into my throat as I grabbed my rifle, my hands slick with sweat. The creature emerged from the shadows, its pale skin glowing in the firelight. It was just as I remembered it, all teeth and claws and hunger. But this time I was ready. I raised my rifle and fired the shot, echoing through the night. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Its eyes fixed on me with a hatred that chilled me to the bone. It lunged forward, its claws slashing through the air. I fired again and again, the bullets tearing through its flesh. But it kept coming, its wounds healing almost as quickly as I inflicted them. I realized with a sinking feeling that I was outmatched. This thing was beyond anything I had ever faced before. As the creature closed in, I reached for my last resort, a Molotov cocktail I had prepared, filled with gasoline and holy water. I lit the rag and threw it. The bottle shattered against the creature's chest. The thing lit up like a torch, the flames consuming its flesh. It shrieked in agony, thrashing and flailing as it tried to put out the fire. But it was too late. The holy water had done its work, weakening the creature's unnatural resilience. I watched as the Wendigo burned, its body crumbling to ash, and as the last embers died away, felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was over, the creature was gone, and the mountains were safe once again. But even as I made my way back down the mountain, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The forest felt different somehow, the silence heavier than before. It was as if the Wendigo's presence had left a stain on the land, a darkness that couldn't be erased. When I finally reached civilization, I found that the disappearances had stopped. The authorities chalked it up to a rogue bear or a pack of wolves, something that had moved on to other hunting grounds. But I knew the truth. I tried to move on with my life, to put the memories of the creature behind me, but it was harder than I thought. The nightmares came almost every night, visions of teeth and claws and pale, hungry eyes. I started to withdraw from the world, spending more and more time alone. Even Sam, who had once been my closest friend, seemed like a stranger to me. Now, the only one who seemed to understand was an old Native American man I met at a bar one night. He listened to my story without judgment, his eyes deep and knowing. When I was finished, he told me a tale of his own. The Wendigo is a creature of hunger, he said, his voice low and gravelly. It is born from the desperation of a man who has turned to cannibalism to survive, and once it has tasted human flesh, it can never be satisfied. He looked at me then, his gaze piercing. You may have killed the creature, but the hunger never dies. It will find a new host, a new body to inhabit, and the cycle will begin again. His words haunted me, the implications too terrible to consider, but deep down I knew he was right. The Wendigo was more than just a creature, it was a curse, a manifestation of the darkest parts of human nature, and so I made a decision I would return to the mountains, to the place where it all began. I would stand watch over the land, a guardian against the hunger that lurked in the shadows. It wasn't a life I had ever imagined for myself, but it was the only one that made sense anymore. The steel mill, the city, the life I had once known, all of it seemed like a distant dream. Now, as I stood on the edge of the cliff once more, looking out over the vast expanse of the Alleghenies, I felt a sense of purpose settle over me. This was my duty, now my calling, and I would see it through no matter the cost. Years have passed since that day. The world has moved on, the memories of the creature fading into legend. But I am still here, keeping watch over these ancient mountains. It's a solitary life, one that many would find unbearable, but for me it is a sacred trust. I am the guardian, the one who stands between the world of man and the hunger that lurks in the shadows. There are times when I question my choices, when the loneliness and the isolation become almost too much to bear. But then I remember that fateful trip, the horror we faced, and the lives that were lost. And I know that I am where I am meant to be. I often think of Sam and Marcus, of the friendship we once shared and the bond that was forged in the crucible of fear. I wonder what they would make of the man I have become, the life I have chosen. But in the end, it doesn't matter. This is my path, my destiny, and I will walk it to the end. A silent sentinel against the darkness. For I know that the Wendigo is still out there, waiting, watching, and as long as I draw breath, I will be there to meet it. For I am a watcher in the woods, the guardian of the Alleghenies, and I will never rest until the hunger is banished forever and the mountains are free once more. This is my solemn vow, my eternal vigil, and I will keep it until the end of my days. As the sun sets over the mountains, casting long shadows across the land, I turn my gaze to the horizon. The wind whispers through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of the past. And in that moment I feel a sense of peace wash over me. For I know that as long as I am here, the Wendigo will never claim another victim. And that knowledge gives me the strength to carry on, to face whatever trials may come. And so I stand, a lone figure against the gathering dark, a guardian of the wild places. And I know that, no matter what horrors the future may hold, I will be ready. For I am the watcher, the protector, and I will never falter, never fail. This is my oath, my sacred duty, and I will uphold it now and forever. For I am the keeper of the mountains, the guardian of the Alleghenies, and in me the spirit of the wild endures unbroken and unbowed. Let the Wendigo come if it dares, for I will be waiting, ready to meet it head on, and in the end only one of us will walk away. But I knew in my heart of hearts that it will not be the creature, for I have faced it before and emerged victorious. And I will do so again as many times as it takes, for I am the watcher, the guardian, and I will never rest, never waver. This is my destiny, my calling, and I embrace it with all that I am. Let the mountains bear witness, let the winds carry my resolve. For I am here, and I will remain a bastion against the darkness, a shield for the innocent. And in me, the spirit of the Alleghenies lives on now and forever. My name is Aaron Dowd. I never imagined that a simple job could turn into the worst day of my life. I worked for the U.S. government for almost a decade now, specializing in genetic research at a secluded facility nestled deep within the forests of Virginia. The project, codenamed Albatross, was designed to explore the boundaries of gene editing and its potential applications in enhancing human capabilities. But as with all things that meddle with nature, there were unintended consequences. The facility was an imposing structure, hidden away from the public eye, surrounded by high fences and dense woods. It was meant to be secure, impenetrable, but nothing is ever as secure as it seems. Today everything went wrong. It started as a routine day. I had just finished my coffee when Dr. Lenora Hunt, the head of the project, called for an emergency meeting. Her voice had an edge to it, something I'd never heard before. The kind of tension that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. "We've lost contact with Sector 7, she said, her voice tight, and the specimen in that sector. Experiment 41 has broken containment. Experiment 441 was no ordinary subject. It was a hybrid of several predatory species designed to enhance certain human traits, speed, strength, resilience, but something had gone terribly wrong with its development. Instead of enhancing human abilities, it became a monstrous fusion of animalistic rage and cunning. It wasn't supposed to be alive, let alone free. A team was assembled to assess the situation. Dr. Hunt, myself, and 3 security personnel who looked like they'd seen more than their share of combat. We geared up quickly, knowing time was against us. The hallways leading to Sector 7 were unnervingly quiet, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights above, which cut through the silence. The facility had a cold, sterile feel to it. White walls, steel doors, and the scent of antiseptic hanging in the air. But beneath that, there was something else, fear. We reached Sector 7's main entrance. The thick metal door was bent and torn, as if something had wrenched it open with inhuman strength. Blood smeared across the floor and walls, a gruesome testament to whatever had happened here. One of the security personnel gagged at the stench of death, overpowering even the antiseptic. We stepped inside and the room was a nightmare, tables overturned, equipment shattered, and more blood. But there were no bodies. Dr. Fanta perched a terminal, her hands trembling as she tried to access the surveillance footage. I kept my eyes on the shadows, every nerve in my body screaming that we were not alone. The footage showed the last moments before the cameras cut out. Experiment 41, no longer the sedated subject we had known, had torn through its restraints and gone berserk. Its body was massive, 7 feet tall, a grotesque blend of human and beast. Muscles rippled under skin that seemed stretched too tight, with patches of fur growing in irregular patches. Its limbs were too long, ending in claws that looked sharp enough to rend steel. But it was its face that haunted me, distorted, animalistic, with a twisted snarl that barely resembled a human expression. Then the screen went black. Before we could react, a noise echoed from the far side of the room. The scraping sound, metal on concrete. We turned as one, flashlights cutting through the darkness. There at the edge of the light, it stood, Experiment. It moved with terrifying speed, crossing the room in seconds. One of the guards opened fire. The gunshots were deafening in the enclosed space. Bullets struck the creature, but it didn't slow down. It plowed into the guard, tossing him like a rag doll into the wall. The sickening crunch of bones breaking filled the air. Dr. Hunt screamed, fumbling with a syringe of sedative. She never got the chance to use it. The creature was on her before she could even raise her arm. It lifted her off the ground, claws digging into her flesh. The sound of her choking on her own blood will stay with me forever. I don't remember making the decision to run, but suddenly I was sprinting down the corridor, the other 2 guards right behind me. The facility was a maze, and every turn felt like it could be our last. I could hear it behind us, the thudding of its massive feet, the scraping of claws against the walls. We reached the central control room where we could initiate a lockdown. But as we slammed the door shut and locked it, one of the guards collapsed, clutching his chest. The other guard and I didn't have time to check if he was alive. Experiment 41 was battering against the door. Its savage cacophony filled the room. The door was reinforced steel, but we knew it wouldn't hold forever. I scrambled to the console trying to activate the lockdown. My hands were shaking, but I managed to input the codes. Red lights flashed as the facility's alarms blared. The doors throughout the facility slammed shut and the creature's battering stopped. For a moment there was silence, but the silence didn't last. A crash echoed through the air as Experiment 401 broke through the door. The guard beside me fired again, emptying his clip into the creature's chest. This time it staggered but didn't fall. It was hurt, bleeding from multiple wounds, but it kept coming. The guard screamed in defiance as the creature charged, its claws outstretched. I watched in horror as it ripped him apart. Desperation took over. I grabbed a scalpel from a nearby table, useless but the only thing within reach. I moved toward the exit, trying to stay calm, trying not to think about what I'd just seen. But before I could reach the door, it was on me. I swung wildly, the scalpel glancing off its arm, doing nothing to stop its advance. Its claws lashed out, catching me in the side. The pain was blinding, but I kept moving, knowing that stopping meant death. I threw myself through the door and hit the emergency override. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound of the creature's roars muffled by the thick metal. I lay there on the cold floor, blood seeping from my side, trying to catch my breath. I don't know how long I stayed there before I heard the distant sounds of helicopter reinforcements. They must have seen the lockdown protocol and come to investigate. When they found me, I was barely conscious, but I was alive. They secured the facility and took me to a nearby hospital. The last thing I remember before blacking out was seeing the lifeless body of Experiment 41 being dragged away by the response team. I was told later that the creature was killed by the security team, those who survived anyway. They'd found it in the control room, still trying to claw its way through the steel door. I don't know if I believed them. I saw how resilient it was, but they had the body or what was left of it, and that was enough for me. The facility was shut down after that. Albatross was deemed too dangerous, but all the research was destroyed. I left the project, left the facility, and never looked back, but the nightmares followed me. Every night I'd find myself back in that facility, running from something I couldn't quite see but could feel. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my side aching where the creature's claws had torn into me. I tried to move on, to put the whole thing behind me, but it wasn't that easy. The scars on my body were a constant reminder of what had happened, of what we had done. He had played God, and we had paid the price. I started seeing a therapist trying to work through the trauma. It helped a little. But there are some things that can't be unseen, some experiences that change you forever. I often wonder about the others involved in the project. Dr. Hunt, the security personnel, the other researchers. I wonder if they're haunted by the same memories, the same guilt. We were all responsible in our own way for what happened. We all had blood on our hands. But mostly I think about Experiment 401. Or was it really a monster, a victim, a little of both? I don't know. I don't think I'll ever know, but I do know that it will haunt me for the rest of my life. It's been 5 years since that day. 5 years of trying to piece my life back together, of trying to find some semblance of normalcy. I've left the government, left the world of genetic research behind. I work in a quiet lab now doing routine tests. Nothing that could ever lead to something like Experiment. It's not exciting, but it's safe, and after what I've been through, safe is enough. But sometimes, late at night, when the lab is empty and the only sound is the humming of the machines, I think I can hear it, that savage cacophony echoing in the distance. And for a moment, I'm back there in that bloody control room fighting for my life. I know it's not real. I know Experiment 401 is dead, but the fear is real. The memories are real, and they'll be with me forever. I've learned to live with it the best I can. I focus on the present, on the people in my life, on the small joys that each day brings. I try not to dwell on the past, on what could have been, on what we unleashed. But he'll never forget. I can't, because as much as Albatross was a nightmare, it was also a warning. A warning of what can happen when we push too far, when we cross lines that were never meant to be crossed. And it's a mommy I'll carry with me always. A reminder of the worst day of my life and of the price we pay when we try to play God. We are not meant to wield such power. We are not meant to reshape life itself. That is a lesson I learned in Blood and Terror, and it is a lesson I will never forget. As long as I live, I will carry the scars of experiment, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that nothing like it ever happens again. That is my burden and my promise to the memory of those we lost and to the future we nearly destroyed. I will keep that promise, no matter the cost. In 1996, I wasn't looking for trouble. In fact, I was just trying to get away from it. You spend enough time in the woods and you start to feel like the only thing out there you can count on is yourself. My name's Curtis Rollins, and I had been a ranger for about 12 years when I ended up in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming. You know, the kind of place where even your own thoughts echo if you're quiet long enough. That's where I found myself thinking it'd be a good idea to sign on to patrol the Teton National Forest. It was supposed to be just another regular day. You get up, do your rounds, check the trails, make sure nobody's off getting themselves lost or eaten by a mountain lion. The usual, things got weird fast. My first clue should have been the radio dead silence. Now, on a place like this, you expect some dead zones, but they're not this bad. I hadn't had a peep from base in hours, figured the mountains were messing with the signal again. I've always liked working alone, though. Gives me time to think. And if there's one thing, I've got plenty of its thoughts, not all good ones, mind you. Like why I've been divorced twice, why I still can't quit smoking, or why I still don't own a gun, despite running into every kind of wildlife Wyoming has to offer. But hey, if a moose charges, you just stand your ground and hope for the best, right? It's a mantra I lived by, and it hadn't failed me yet. That day I was making my way down one of the lesser-known trails, a rocky, narrow path with no business being used by hikers. But you get all kinds out here. I was just about to turn around when I saw it, a pair of boots sticking out from behind a tree. Not the rest of a person, just the boots. Not a good sign. I approached, stomach tightening. What I found wasn't much better a body, but the way it was torn up, well, no mountain lion did this. Something had gone to town on this guy. His chest was a mess, shredded like paper, and there was no mistaking the bite marks. Big ones. Whatever took him down wasn't done quickly. You could see the fear etched into his half-gone face. The smart thing would have been to head back, call it in, get back up, but the radio still wasn't working and I wasn't about to leave the scene without figuring out what in the hell had done this. I pulled out my old Polaroid camera. Yeah, I know who carries one of those around, but when the Park Service is cheap, you make do with what you've got. Snapped a few shots, just enough to prove I wasn't losing my mind. Then decided to look for tracks, and that's when I found the trail. You know, I've tracked wolves, bears, all sorts of critters, but this was different. The tracks were large, bigger than anything I'd seen before, but they weren't from a bear clawed, sure, but more elongated. I followed them, careful to stay quiet, even though my brain was screaming at me to turn around. I'd been stubborn my whole life, though probably why I'm still a park ranger when I could have done something more sensible with my life. The tracks led me deeper into the woods to a part of the park that wasn't even on the map. There was this strange scent in the air, like a mixture of damp earth and something rotting. The trees were thicker here, more oppressive in the silence. Well, it was a silence that pressed in on you, made your skin crawl. I kept following the tracks, even as the daylight started to fade. Now, I'm not one to scare easily, but there was something about this place that felt wrong, like I was trespassing on something ancient and malevolent. The track seemed to go on forever, winding through the dense foliage, leading me further and further from anything familiar. As night began to fall, I realized I had to make a decision: turn back and risk losing the trail, or push on and face whatever was out there in the dark. I've never been one to back down from a challenge, even when common sense is screaming at me to do just that. So I pushed on, using my flashlight to guide my way. The darkness seemed to swallow the light, pressing in on me from all sides. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves had me on edge. I kept telling myself it was just the wildlife, just the normal sounds of the forest at night. But deep down I knew better. I don't know how long I walked, minutes, hours, it all blurred together. But eventually I found myself in a small clearing. The tracks led right to the center and then vanished. I swept my flashlight around, looking for any sign of where the creature might have gone. That's when I heard it, a low growl coming from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly I turned toward the sound, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and there, in the beam of light, I saw it. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I was hunched over, gnawing on something I couldn't see clearly. But when it stood up, I realized just how wrong I was. It was tall, taller than any bear, and built like something out of a nightmare. Its fur was matted, hanging off in clumps, and its limbs seemed too long. Its back arched unnaturally, and the head reminded me of a wolf, but something about the way it moved, the way it twisted toward me, was all wrong, like someone had taken a wolf and stretched it into a shape it had no business being in. And the smell, that smell hit me like a punch to the gut. It was the same rotting stench I'd noticed earlier, but stronger and more pungent. It made my eyes water and my stomach churn. That's when it turned fully, and I saw what it had been chewing on, another hiker or what was left of them. The creature had torn them apart, leaving nothing but a bloody mess. I wanted to run, scream, or do something, but I was frozen, my feet rooted to the ground. The creature took a step toward me, its eyes glinting in the light of my flashlight. They were intelligent eyes filled with a hunger that went beyond the physical. It took another step and then another. I could hear its heavy breathing, see the steam rising from its nostrils in the cold night air. It was close now, close enough that I could have reached out and touched it. And then it spoke, not with words, but with a voice that echoed in my mind. The word reverberated through my skull. Leave and never return. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush without regard for the noise I was making. I could hear the creature behind me, its heavy footfalls shaking the ground, and I didn't look back. How couldn't I just kept running, my lungs burning, my legs aching? I don't know how I made it back to the ranger station. It's all a blur of fear and adrenaline, but somehow I stumbled through the door, collapsing onto the floor. It took me a while to catch my breath, to calm my racing heart. And even as I sat there trying to make sense of what I'd seen, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let that thing roam free, not after what it had done. I radioed for help, praying that someone would answer, but it was only static. I tried again and again, but nothing. It was like the creature's presence had somehow interfered with the signal. I knew I had to go back out there to try and find a way to stop it. But I also knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help, someone who would believe me, someone who could handle themselves in the wilderness. That's when I remembered an old friend, a retired hunter named Jack. He'd spent his whole life tracking game in these woods, and if anyone could help me, it was him. I drove to his cabin, not caring about the late hour. When he opened the door, I must have looked like a madman, wide-eyed and rambling about monsters of the woods. But Jack just listened, nodding slowly as I told my story. When I was done, he disappeared into his cabin, returning a few minutes later with a worn duffel bag. Inside were rifles, knives, and other hunting gear. He looked at me, his eyes hard and determined. "Let's go hunting," he said. And I felt a surge of relief. I wasn't alone anymore. We set out at dawn, following the creature's tracks back into the heart of the forest. Jack moved silently, his eyes scanning the underbrush for any sign of our quarry. I followed close behind. We found the clearing where I'd first seen the creature, but there was no sign of it, just the remains of its latest victim scattered across the forest floor. Jack knelt down, examining the tracks. "It's old," he said in a low voice, "older than anything I've ever seen. This is no ordinary animal." We pressed on deeper into the woods. The air grew colder, the shadows longer, and then we heard it. That same low growl echoing through the trees. It came from all around us, like the creature was everywhere at once. We stood back to back, our weapons at the ready, and then it emerged, rising up from the shadows like a nightmare made flesh. It was even more terrifying in daylight. Its matted fur and elongated limbs, a mockery of nature. Its eyes locked onto us, and I could feel the weight of its hunger, its desire to tear us apart. Jack fired first. The rifle shot echoed through the forest. The creature stumbled, but didn't fall. It charged, moving with a speed that defied belief. I fired my own weapon, aiming for its head, its heart, anything that might bring it down. But it kept coming, shrugging off bullets like they were nothing. It slammed into Jack, sending him flying. I heard the sickening crunch of bones breaking as he hit a tree. I was alone now, facing down the creature. It turned to me, its eyes filled with malevolent intelligence. I know it was toying with me, savoring my fears, so I pulled out my flare gun, my last resort. I aimed it at the creature, my hand shaking. It took a step towards me, its jaws opening wide. I fired the flare, arcing through the air. It hit the creature square in the chest, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the creature let out a roar of pain as the flare ignited its fur. It thrashed and writhed, trying to put out the flames, but the fire spread, consuming it from the inside out. I watched as it fell to the ground, its body convulsing in death throes. And when it was over, the creature lay still, its body nothing more than a charred husk. I collapsed to the ground, my energy spent. I don't remember much after that. I know I made it back to the ranger station and called for help for Jack, but it's all a haze. The official report said it was a bear attack, but I know the truth. I saw it with my own eyes, felt its hunger, its malevolence, and I know it's still out there somewhere in the depths of the forest, waiting for the next unlucky soul to stumble across its path. And when it does, may God have mercy on them. Because that creature, it has none, and I left the Park Service after that, moved to the city, tried to put it all behind me, but sometimes in the dead of night, I still hear its voice in my dreams. Leave, it whispers, leave and never return. But I can't, because part of me, the part that's still that stubborn, foolhardy ranger, knows I'll be back someday. I'll return to those woods and I'll finish what I started. One way or another. It was 1991 when I realized that the forest doesn't care if you're brave, stupid, or both. I've been working as a park ranger for about 7 years, stationed in the White River National Forest, Colorado, thinking I'd seen it all. My name's Owen McCoy, and I've always thought myself to be a practical man, a realist. You know, the kind of guy who doesn't get lost in thoughts, mostly because they're not very interesting. But I've always loved the solitude of the forest. Even if my coworkers joke that I prefer the trees over people, it's hard to disagree with them. People talk too much trees, keep things simple. I had my morning coffee black like always, and is about to head out to check on a remote camping site. The usual stuff, make sure no one's being a fool with a campfire, no one's littering the trails. That's where I met the Stanton family. 3 of them, Robert, his wife Marlene, and their teenage son Dylan. The kind of folks you knew didn't spend much time outdoors just by looking at them. City folk, soft hands, the whole deal. Robert kept asking about bears, and Marlene mentioned wolves, like we were about to walk into some National Geographic episode. Dylan just looked bored out of his mind, glued to his Game Boy. My gut told me they'd end up being trouble. Still, they weren't the worst I've dealt with, so I gave them the standard "don't wander off the trail" speech and figured that would be the last I'd see of them. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. I took the long route hiking up to an old fire tower that hadn't been used in years. The sun filtered through the dense canopy, dappling the forest floor with light and shadow. The air was crisp and clean, filled with a scent of pine and earth. As I climbed higher, the trees thinned out, offering glimpses of the valley below, a sea of green stretching out to the horizon. My radio crackled to life around noon, and it was my colleague, Mike. He was manning the main station and had been there longer than I had. Grumpy old man with bad knees, but a good ranger. Oh, and we got a call from the Stantons. Kid's gone missing. You're closest. Go check it out. Great. Just what I needed. A teenager who probably wandered off chasing a squirrel or trying to get a better signal on his Game Boy. I packed up and headed back down the trail toward their camp. When I arrived, Robert was in full panic mode. Marlene was holding on to him, looking like she was 2 seconds away from tears. Dylan had been missing for about 2 hours, they said. I asked the usual questions. Had he mentioned going off on his own? How he'd been upset? Did he take any of their gear? The answers were all unhelpful. Dylan had just vanished. 1 minute he was sitting near the fire, the next gone. Robert suggested it was a bear or maybe a wolf. I dismissed that quickly. I'd do these woods? Sure, there were predators, but this wasn't their style. Bears don't sneak up on you and snatch kids without making a mess. Wolves don't care for humans unless provoked. I tried to reassure them, telling them I'd find their son. But as I set off into the woods, following the faint trail from their campsite, a sense of unease settled over me. Something didn't feel right. The forest, usually alive with the chatter of birds and the rustle of small animals, was eerily quiet. The first hour of searching was fruitless. I scattered out in concentric circles, calling Dylan's name, whistling into the trees. But the only response was the echo of my own voice and the crunch of my boots on the forest floor. It wasn't until I moved further away from the main trail, near a more overgrown part of the forest, that I saw something off. The trees here were different, older, darker, the kind of place where sunlight had to fight its way through the canopy. It felt like stepping into a different world. That's when I found the backpack. It was half buried in some brush, like it had been dropped in a hurry. I checked the tag and sure enough, it had Dylan's name on it, but no sign of the kid. I radioed Mike, told him what I found and that I was going deeper. He offered to send back up, but I declined. Didn't feel necessary at the time. Now, in hindsight, maybe that was my mistake. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. I'm not talking about the peaceful quiet of nature. This was different. No birds, no wind, just nothing. It was like the world itself was holding its breath. My gut, which had been nagging at me all day, started twisting into knots. Something was off, way off, and then I saw it. At first it looked like a large dog, or maybe a deer. It was hunched over near a fallen tree. Its back turned to me, but as I got closer I realized it wasn't a deer. The thing had fur, sure, but it was patchy, clinging to skin that looked too pale, almost sickly. Its limbs were long, unnaturally so, and its hands, because they weren't paws, were wrapped around something on the ground. I stopped dead in my tracks. I saw what it was holding. It was Dylan. My first thought was that the kid had gotten attacked by some kind of sick animal, but the longer I stared, the less sense that made. Whatever this thing was, it was too thin, too gaunt to be a predator, and it was doing something to him, like it was studying him, its head tilting side to side. It didn't look right. Its head was too flat, like something had squashed it down. Didn't think I yelled loud. In hindsight, maybe that wasn't the best move. The thing jerked its head toward me so fast I thought it might have snapped its own neck. Its eyes, or whatever passed for eyes, were black, deep, empty holes. It had no expression, just a smooth stretch of skin where a face should be. It moved faster than anything I've ever seen, lunging forward. Before I even had time to react, I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and crashing to the ground. My hand went for my knife, but I didn't have time to pull it out before the thing was on top of me. I kicked wildly, trying to get the damn thing off me, but it was strong, too strong for something that looked like it hadn't eaten in years. I could feel its breath, or maybe that was just the air around it. Cold, damp, like it was sucking the warmth right out of me. In a panic, I grabbed a rock big enough to do damage and swung. It made contact with a sickening crack, and the thing let out this awful sound like bones grinding together. It reeled back, giving me just enough time to get to my feet. I wasn't going to stick around to see if it recovered. I ran, crashing through the underbrush, barely able to breathe. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves seemed to hold a threat. Now the forest, once a place of solace, had turned into a nightmare. I radioed Mike, telling him I needed backup. Now that there was something out here, something wrong. He didn't argue, said help was on the way, but I wasn't sure how much help they'd be. What could they do against something like that? When I got back to the Stentons camp, Marlene was hysterical. I couldn't tell her what I saw, not in any way that would make sense. All I could say was that we had to leave now. Robert didn't argue. We packed up and headed back down the trail, my hand never leaving the hilt of my knife. Every step felt like an eternity. The trees seemed to press in around us, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. I kept looking back over my shoulder, expecting to see that thing following us, but there was nothing, just the oppressive silence of the forest. We made it back to the ranger station in one piece, though I don't know how. Mike was already there, looking pale as a ghost. He didn't ask what happened, just looked at me like he knew. The official report we filed said Dylan Stanton was a victim of an animal attack. We didn't specify what kind of animal because, truth be told, none of us knew. But there wasn't a body left to confirm it, just traces of blood on the dirt. The parents brought the story too shaken to question it. But Mike and I, we knew that thing. Whatever it wasn't just an animal, it was something else, something older, something wrong. After that, I took a leave of absence, told the higher-ups I needed some time away, maybe see a shrink or two. They were understanding. Losing a kid on your watch is rough after all. But every now and then when I'm alone in the woods, I catch myself looking over my shoulder. Not because I'm afraid of what's out there, but because I know what's out there and it's watching. I tried to go back to normal, to pretend like nothing had happened. But how do you unsee something like that? How do you forget the feeling of pure primal terror? I started having nightmares, vivid ones. I'd be back in that part of the forest, the trees looming over me, the silence pressing down like a physical weight. And then I'd see it. That thing crouched in the shadows, waiting. I'd try to run, but my legs would move. I'd try to scream, but no sound would come out. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the echo of that creature's scream still ringing in my ears. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what it was. I started digging, looking into old records, local legends, anything that might give me a clue. And that's when I found it. A story buried deep in the archives, dating back to the early 1900s. It was a newspaper article, yellowed with age, and the ink faded, but the headline was still clear: child vanishes in White River Forest. The details were sparse, but the gist was there. Family out for a camping trip just like the Stantons. A child, a little girl who wandered off and never came back, and a description of a creature, a thing that was seen lurking in the woods around the time of the disappearance. A creature with long limbs, pale skin, and a face that wasn't quite a face. It was the same thing I had seen, the same thing that had taken Dylan. I don't know what to make of it all. Part of me wants to dismiss it, to chalk it up to a trick of the light, a product of fear and adrenaline. But I know what I saw. I knew the cold sinking feeling in my gut when I looked into those black empty eyes. Mike, retired a year later, said his knees finally gave out, but I think it was more than that. He didn't want to be out there anymore. Can't say I blame him. The creature, I don't know. Maybe it's still out there lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. Maybe it's something that's always been there, something we've forgotten in our modern world with our cell phones and satellite maps. Or here's what I do know. Sometimes the forest takes things back, and if you're lucky, it lets you leave, or at least most of you. I got one final laugh out of this, though. I always said, the trees keep things simple. And after that day, I think they really do. It's the things between the trees you've got to watch out for, because the forest doesn't care if you're brave, stupid, or both. It just takes what it wants, and if you're not careful, it might just take you too. My name is Ethan Walker, and I've been a park ranger for the past 15 years. The job has taken me all over, from the lush forests of Oregon to the rolling hills of Pennsylvania to the Great Lake shoreline in Michigan. I faced my share of dangers out here in the wilderness, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in the remote woods of North Carolina. I took this latest assignment in the Nantahala National Forest for a few reasons. First, I love the Appalachian Mountains. The biodiversity is incredible, and the scenery never fails to take my breath away. Second, to be quite honest, I needed the money. Park ranger salaries aren't the highest, and I have a mortgage to pay and a teenage daughter about to head off to college. An extra stipend for working in an isolated area was just the financial boost I required. Third, and perhaps most pressing, I was looking for an escape. My wife passed away 2 years ago after a long battle with cancer. Immersing myself in work, surrounding myself with nature, pushing my body to its limits. It was the only way I knew how to cope with the grief that still felt so raw. Out here, among the waterfalls and wildflowers, hawks and black bears, I finally felt some measure of peace. But that sense of peace didn't last long. It started with little things. Tools disappearing from my truck, a lingering smell of campfire smoke. On clear, windless days, I'd be walking a trail and get the distinct feeling that I was being watched, but I could never spot anything out of place. One evening, after a particularly long day of trail maintenance, I returned to my cabin to find the front door slightly ajar. My heart raced as I approached carefully, one hand hovering over the bear spray on my belt. I called out to see if anyone was inside, but silence was the only reply. Upon entering, everything looked exactly as I had left it that morning, except on my desk sat a small cloth doll. It was old-fashioned and crude, with a cornhusk head and button eyes. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands, trying to understand where it could have come from. Then I saw the note scrawled onto a scrap of yellowed parchment and pinned to the doll's chest. The handwriting was shaky, the message brief, "He's coming for you." A chill ran down my spine as I stepped back out into the gathering dusk. The forest, once so welcoming, suddenly felt different, sinister, full of secrets. What had I gotten myself into that night? I barely slept. The little cornhusk doll sat on my nightstand, button eyes glinting in the moonlight that filtered through the thin curtains. Every creak of the old cabin and every rustle of leaves outside had me jolting upright, scanning the shadows for signs of an intruder. My doll and I was groggy and on edge. I brewed a strong pot of coffee and checked my phone, but of course there was no signal. That was one of the trade-offs of working in such a remote location, complete solitude. I had planned to spend the day doing some wildlife surveys in the back country, but I couldn't shake the unsettled feeling that had lodged itself in my gut. Instead, I radioed the district office to report the doll and the strange note my supervisor promised to send someone up to investigate, but warned it could be a few days given our isolated position. Trying to brush off my unease, I decided to focus on some much-needed projects around the cabin. I spent the morning chopping wood and doing minor repairs on the roof where some shingles had blown loose in a recent storm. Physical labor always helped clear my head. Around noon, I broke for lunch, settling on the cabin's small porch with a sandwich and a battered copy of A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. I had just started to relax when a flicker of movement in the tree line caught my attention. I set aside my book and stood up slowly, shielding my eyes against the midday sun for a better look. There, between the dappled trunks of two massive oaks, stood a figure. At first, I thought it was another hiker, maybe someone in need of directions back to the main trail, but as I watched, my skin began to crawl. There was something off about the way the person was standing, preternaturally still with their head cocked slightly to one side. They were dressed all in black, from their hooded cloak to their heavy mud-caked boots. I called out a greeting, but the figure didn't respond. Instead, they raised one pale hand and crooked a long finger, beckoning me into the forest. An icy rivulet of fear trickled down my back. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and bolt inside the ranger station, to lock the door and reach for the shotgun I kept in the supply closet. But some other impulse, something older and stronger than reason, compelled me to take a step forward. Then the figure retreated into the trees, and, as if pulled by an invisible cable, I followed. The woods swallowed me at once. Shadows pooling beneath a dense canopy above the figure darted ahead, always just out of reach, leading me deeper and deeper into the wilderness. Branches scratched at my face and arms. Roots seemed to writhe beneath my boots, threatening to send me sprawling. It wasn't until the ranger cabin had disappeared completely from view that I came back to myself. I stopped short, chest heaving, suddenly aware of how far I had wandered from the trail. "What am I doing?" I said aloud, my voice seeming to echo in the unnatural silence of the forest. I spun around trying to spot the black-cloaked figure, but now they were nowhere to be seen. With mounting panic, I realized that I wasn't even sure which direction I had come from anymore. The trees all looked the same, and the sun was blotted out by the oppressive foliage overhead. For the first time in my long career as a park ranger, I was well and truly lost, and I couldn't shake the certainty that something or someone had wanted me that way. But why? And more importantly, how would I ever find my way back out again? I stumbled through the forest for what felt like hours, trying to use the slip of the land to guide me back towards the ranger station. My training taught me to stay put when lost, to wait for help, but every hair on the back of my neck screamed at me to keep moving. There was something out there in the woods, and it was watching me. As the light began to fade, so did my hope. I pictured my daughter's face, imagined her waiting for a call that would never come. I thought of all the things I still wanted to tell her, the moments I would miss. A sob hitched in my throat. Just as I was about to collapse from exhaustion, I stumbled into a small clearing. In the center stood an ancient, gnarled oak tree, its trunk twisted like an arthritic spine. Hanging from its branches were dozens of those little corn husk dolls, swaying gently in the breeze. The blood turned to ice water in my veins. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the tree. That's when I heard it. A low, rhythmic chanting, rising and falling like a demented lullaby. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing off the close-packed tree trunks. Heedless of the branches that whipped at my face, I ran blind. Terror propelled me forward, sending me crashing through the undergrowth. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, hounding my every step. I dashed from the tree line so suddenly that I nearly tumbled off a steep embankment, scrambling at the loose earth. I managed to catch myself just in time. In the valley below, I could see the distant lights of a small town, civilization and safety. Half climbing, half skidding down the slope, I emerged onto a narrow, winding road. In the distance, I spotted a lone figure walking along the shoulder. I opened my mouth to cry out, but the words died in my throat. The figure was dressed all in black, a hooded cloak obscuring their features. As I watched in mute horror, they slowly raised their head. Beneath the dark cowl where there should have been a face, there was only a twisted mass of cornus entwined. A scream finally tore loose from my chest. I turned and ran, adrenaline overpowering my fatigue. The road curved, and I caught a brief glimpse of a wooden sign, "Welcome to Whisper Hollow." The name meant nothing to me, but it filled me with dread all the same. What fresh hell had I stumbled into? I knew only one thing for certain. I had to find a way out of these woods before whatever dark presence lurked here found me first. I walked all night, following the winding road, constantly glancing over my shoulder for any sign of pursuit. It wasn't until the gray light of dawn began to seep through the treetops that I allowed myself a moment's pause. I sank down onto a large flat boulder beside the road and took stock of my situation. My radio phone and compass were all missing, probably dropped somewhere in the panic flight through the woods. I had no food, no water, and only the vaguest sense of where I was. The map of the national forest was a clear picture in my mind, but this narrow road was definitely not on it. In the distance, I could just make out the outlines of buildings, the town of Whisper Hollow. A shiver went through me at the memory of that hooded figure on the road. The glimpse of what lay beneath its cloak, what sort of people would live in a place so closely entwined with that thing in the forest. But I had no choice. I needed help. Needed directions back to the ranger station, or at least to a familiar landmark. Stalling my nerve, I pushed off the boulder and started toward the little town. It wasn't long before I reached the first buildings. A handful of weathered houses hunkered down behind sagging picket fences. Both cars were in the driveways. No flicker of TVs behind the windows. The town had an abandoned feel, and I found myself tiptoeing past darkened storefronts with their faded signs, not wanting to break the eerie silence. Finally, I spotted what looked to be the town hall, a squarish brick building with dirty windows and a crooked flagpole out front. To my immense relief, I noticed a light was on inside. I hurried up the cracked concrete steps and pushed open the heavy wooden door. A wave of musty air hit me, carrying the scent of old books and stale coffee. It reminded me so viscerally of my late father's study that I had to pause for a moment, blinking away the sudden moisture in my eyes. My voice echoed in the dimly lit foyer. "Is anyone here? I need some assistance." A door creaked open to my right, and a figure emerged from the gloom. I tensed. But it was just an old man, stooped and liver-spotted, dressed in a threadbare suit. He regarded me with rheumy eyes. His expression was unreadable. "Help, you say?" His voice was thin and papery, his lips barely moving over his words. And what sort of help would a stranger be needing in Whisper Hollow? I hurried to explain my situation. The strange events at the cabin, my confused wanderings in the woods, the urgent need to get back to my ranger station. For all, the old man just stared, occasionally nodding his head or making a thoughtful sound. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he turned, shuffling towards a dusty desk in the corner. "I reckon you best sit down, son. You've stumbled into an old story, and not a happy one." He pulled a yellowed map from a drawer, smudging it out on the desk. I could see the Nantahala forest, the winding roads and landmarks. But there in the center was a blank space, a hole in the map where Whisper Hollow should be. The old man tapped a gnarled finger against that void. "Folks around here know to stay clear of it. Woods noted for generations. There's something in there, something old and dark and hungry. And every few decades, when the stars align just right." He wakes up. He fixed me with a piercing stare, and I felt pinned beneath. "It looks like you've gone and worked it up, son, and God help you now that you have." The old man's words rang in my ears as I left the town hall, the dusty old map clutched in my shaking hands. His directions had been clear enough. Follow the old logging road north until it meets the river, then trace the river west until I hit the ranger station. But his warning echoed louder. Once the thing in the woods wakes, it doesn't rest again until it's fed, and it feeds on fear. I set off at a quick clip, eager to put the unsettling little town behind me. The logging road was overgrown and dotted with potholes, but it was blessedly free of black-cloaked figures and cornhusk talisman. For the first time since I'd found that doll on my desk, I allowed myself a small sliver of hope. That hope began to shrivel as the day wore on and the road showed no signs of meeting any river. The sun inched across the sky, shadows lengthening across the cracked pavement. Every rustle in the undergrowth had me flinching my hand, flying to the empty holster at my belt. I was just contemplating the possibility that the old man had deliberately led me astray when I rounded a bend and found myself at a dead end. The woods simply stopped, giving way to dense thickets of mountain laurel and rhododendron. Despair rose like bile in my throat. I had no choice but to double back, return to Whisper Hollow and demand a better map, a clearer route. The thought of facing the old man's knowing gaze made my skin crawl, but what choice did I have? I turned to retrace my steps and froze. There, standing in the middle of the road, not 20 yards away, was the hooded figure. Cornhusk face, black cloak, the same aura of rawness that I'd felt in the woods. It was perfectly still, facing me, waiting. My breath came in sharp gasps, my heart slamming against my rib cage. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" In response, the figure raised one long, pale arm. Slowly, deliberately, it pointed into the forest to my right. I shook my head vehemently. "No, I'm not going back in there. You can make me." The figure continued to point. Implacable and silent, a sudden gust of wind swept down the road, stirring the leaves at our feet. It almost sounded like whispering, "Feed, feed the hollow." A whimper escaped my throat. I took a step towards the forest, then another. The figure watched as its outstretched arm lowered as I passed. As soon as I crossed the tree line, a familiar chant surrounded me. Low and rhythmic, it built to a frenzy. As I stumbled deeper into the woods, trying in vain to block my ears, I could feel it behind me, herding me like a sheep to slaughter. A distant part of my mind wondered why it didn't just take me. What cruel game was it playing? The rest of me was lost in a haze of terror. My only thought was to keep moving, keep ahead of the thing at my back. The chant rose to a crescendo, and just as the trees abruptly parted, I found myself in a wide clearing ringed by towering oaks. In the center was a sight that drove me to my knees, a massive stone altar stained black with old blood, and stretched out upon it, still and cold, was a body, a man, a park ranger. I don't know how long I knelt there on the forest floor, unable to tear my eyes away from the grisly altar.
The chanting had stopped, replaced by a suffocating silence, broken only by the frantic rasp of my breath.
I recognized the dead ranger. His name was Mike. He'd been a fixture at the annual training conferences, always quick with a joke or a friendly smile. And now he lay, splayed across the ancient stone. His chest a gaping ruin, his eyes staring sightlessly at the canopy above. Slowly, like a newborn foal finding its legs, I stood, and I took one step toward the altar, then another. The rational part of my mind screamed at me to run, but I was beyond reason. I needed to understand I had to make some sense of the nightmare I'd stumbled into. As I drew closer to the grim altar, details began to stand out in sharp relief. Strange symbols were carved into the stone, their edges softened by centuries of wind and rain. Scattered around the base were more of those crude dolls, their cornhusk faces, grinning up at me with mounting horror. I realized that Mike wasn't the only one. The ground around the altar was littered with bones, some old and bleached by the elements, others bearing scraps of mildewed green fabric. The remains of other rangers, other victims of this insatiable being. Why? The question burst from me in an anguished whisper. Why is it doing this? As if in answer, the wind picked up, sending dead leaves skittering across the clearing. They swirled around me in a vortex, faster and faster until they coalesced into a shape. A man, tall and gaunt, dressed in antiquated ranger garb. His face was a ruin of rotting flesh, but his eyes burned with a dark intelligence. You asked why? The apparition said, its voice, the dry rustle of 1,000 dead leaves. It is our duty, our sacred charge. What duty? I asked hoarsely. What could possibly justify this? The ghost ranger smiled, a terrible stretching of desiccated skin. To feed the forest, of course, to pay the price it demands, so that the people in the world beyond can hike and hunt and play, all unaware of what stalks between the trees. The forest must be fed, and we, the rangers, are the ones who feed it. My mind reeled, trying to process the enormity of what he was suggesting. A pact, ancient and bloody, binding the rangers to this primordial evil. It was insanity, it was monstrous. The ghostly ranger seemed to sense my thoughts. You will understand in time, he said almost gently, as I did. As all who wear the uniform must, the forest always gets what it is owed. With that, the phantom began to unravel, breaking apart into swirling leaves. Once more, the wind died, and I was left alone in the haunted clearing with only the creak of branches and the unblinking stare of my dead colleague. I sank to my knees in the blood-soaked dirt, my mind searching desperately for escape, even as the truth settled like a shroud over me. There was no way out except the one that led to the altar. I was a park ranger, and the forest was hungry. My return hike to the ranger station passed in a blur, my feet carrying me over the once familiar trails as if of their own accord. I felt numb, hollowed out by the revelation at the altar clearing. The small cabin looked so ordinary as it came into view, its weathered boards and cheap curtains unchanged from when I'd left. Was it only yesterday? It felt like a lifetime, like the person who had poured his morning coffee in that kitchen was a stranger to me. Now I stumbled through the door, my boots leaving smears of dark earth and darker blood on the threshold. Mechanically, I went to the radio, switched it on, my lips already forming the words that would bring more innocence into this nightmare forest. But my hand froze on the transmit button. The faces of the rangers I had known had worked with swam before me, their easy camaraderie, their dedication to the job, their dry, gallows humor, all of it a mask, a shield against the unthinkable truth. And like God Mike, who had shown me the ropes when I first started, who always had a kind word and a Snickers bar to share on long treks, they had all understood the price of the uniform. What could I do any less? I was a ranger. This was my duty, my burden to bear. If not me, then it would only be someone else. Another name to carve into that blood-stained altar. My hand fell away from the radio. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to go about my work as normal, as if the world hadn't tilted on its axis. I repaired trails, managed campsites, kept a smile fixed on my face as I directed tourists to the best fishing spots. And every night I locked myself in my cabin and drank until the scratching at the door and the rustling in the trees faded into uneasy dreams. I was a husk going through the motions as the life I had known crumbled around me. My daughter's excited college updates went unanswered. My concerned family's calls unreturned. What could I possibly say to them? How could I bridge the yawning gulf between their world and mine? The seasons changed, summer fading into fall, the forest blazed with color, all oranges and reds and golds that seemed to mock the darkness at its heart. The chant, the wordless whisper that had first drawn me under the hungry trees, was a constant, now ebbing and flowing at the edges of my awareness. I was no longer a warden of this forest, I belonged to it. I awoke one night near the end of October to find my body moving, rising from the tangled sheets as if hoisted on invisible strings. In detached horror, I watched my hand select my uniform from the closet, button up my shirt, lace my boots. Observer in my own mind as my feet carried me out into the chill night air.
The moon was high and full, painting the barren trees in shades of silver and deepest shadow. I awed through the brush with pride or natural grace, never stumbling, never faltering. The chant was so loud now that it filled my skull until there was room for nothing else. By the time I reached the altar clearing, I was almost relieved. The waiting was over, the terrible anticipation, the dread and self-loathing, they were behind me. Now there was only the task at hand. The black-cloaked figure was there, as I had known it would be. It stood at the head of the altar, those pale hands outstretched in a mockery of benediction. And there, stretched upon the stone, a woman, a hiker, judging by her pack and sturdy boots. Her eyes were open, wide, gleaming with fear and reflected moonlight. I moved to stand beside her, my hands finding the hilt of the ceremonial blade without conscious direction. The obsidian knife was ancient, its surface pitted and stained with the memory of countless sacrifices. "Please," the woman whispered, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. "Please, you don't have to do this." That was the truth of it, the inescapable reality that I had fought for so long and so hard. This was my purpose, carved into the fabric of my being, just as those arcane symbols were graven in the stone beneath us. I met the woman's terrified gaze and smiled. "Don't be afraid." I heard myself say, my voice soft and soothing as a lullaby, "It will all be over soon." I raised the blade, the chant building to a transcendent roar. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, every branch straining towards the altar, towards the blood that would feed its endless hunger. I thought of my daughter, my beautiful girl on the cusp of adulthood. I hoped she would remember me as I was, not as the thing I had become. I hoped she would never set foot in these woods, never know the price that had been paid for her freedom. Most of all, I hoped that when my successor came, as they inevitably would, they would grant me the same mercy that I now bestowed. The knife flashed down, the forest shuddered with obscene satisfaction, and Ranger Ethan Walker, the man I had been, was no more. When I took the job as a park ranger, I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I never could have imagined the horrors lurking in the remote wilderness I was tasked to protect. Growing up in Michigan, I always loved the outdoors, camping, hiking, fishing in the pristine waters of the Great Lakes. It's where I live. So when I graduated college with a pile of student loan debt and slim job prospects, becoming a park ranger seemed like a dream come true. A chance to spend my days in nature while earning a steady paycheck. My first assignment took me to the rugged forests of Oregon. I was in awe of the towering Douglas firs, the crystal-clear mountain streams teeming with trout. But there was also an eerie stillness to the woods, a sense that I was being watched from the shadows. The other rangers warned me about the strange occurrences that plagued the park, campers gone missing without a trace, inhuman shrieks piercing the night, ancient Native American legends of dark entities that roamed the land. I brushed it off as tall tales and campfire stories. Oh, how naive I was back then. If only I knew the nightmare that awaited me. It started small at first. Tracks in the mud that I couldn't identify, the lingering stench of decay on an early morning breeze. Then I began finding the mutilated carcasses of deer and elk, their bodies ravaged by an unnatural predator. When I reported it to my superiors, they ordered me to keep it quiet. The last thing the cash-strapped Parks Department needed was a PR disaster that scared away the tourists. So I suffered in silence as the woods came alive with a sinister presence, something ancient and evil stalked between the trees, always just out of sight. Watching, waiting, slowly draining my sanity. I became jumpy, paranoid, barely able to sleep. The solitude of the ranger station that I once found so peaceful now felt like a prison. There was nowhere to hide from the creeping dread deep down. I knew I should quit, that no job was worth jeopardizing my mental health. But I was drowning in debt, behind on my mortgage, my car payments, my insurance. Quitting meant financial ruin, and so I stayed even as my worst nightmares took root in reality. My next park assignment brought me to the Pennsylvania backcountry, a wild tangle of misty hollows and fog-shrouded ridges, a place of immense natural beauty and deep-rooted folklore. I knew the legends of that region all too well from my studies. Whispers of strange creatures, witches, and devil-worshipping cults had haunted those hills for centuries. But steeped in debt and desperate for work, I didn't have the luxury of being choosy about job locations. The position in Pennsylvania promised more pay, and I badly needed every cent I could get. The foreclosure notices were piling up, and my once good credit was circling the drain. I felt like I was slowly being buried alive. So I packed up my meager belongings and made the long drive from Oregon to Pennsylvania in my sputtering old Chevy, praying it wouldn't die on me. With each passing mile, the roads narrowed and the towns grew further apart, till it was just me and an endless tunnel of emerald leaves. An uneasy feeling crept over me, a sense that I was driving into the maw of something unknown and sinister. The remote ranger station that was to be my home looked like something out of a slasher film, a decrepit cabin with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. It sat alone in a sea of rustling trees. Inside wasn't much better. Sagging floorboards, cobwebs in every corner, a pervasive odor of mold and mouse droppings. But it had electricity and running water, which made it a palace compared to some of the places I'd stayed. That first night in the cabin was when the whispers started, sibilant voices murmuring just outside the window as I tried to sleep on the lumpy cot, taunting me, beckoning me. The rational part of my exhausted mind told me it was just the wind in the branches. But as I lay there in the musty darkness, a creeping certainty took hold that something in that primordial forest knew I had arrived and it was hungry. Morning brought oppressive, low-hanging fog that transformed the woods into a shifting phantasmagoria. Twisted shapes materialized and vanished in the mist. Even the birdsong sounded distorted and unnatural. With a shudder, I strapped on my pack and headed out to patrol my new territory. The rawness hit me like a fist blow. This forest was sick, tainted, oozing malice from every gnarled root and mossy stone. Thorny brambles clawed at my legs like grasping talons. Streams burbled like mocking laughter. The very air felt greasy and corrupt. Each step I took was an effort, as if the undergrowth itself was trying to drag me down into an earthy tomb. That's when I discovered the first body. It dangled from a tree branch, arms outstretched like a grotesque marionette. Bile surged into my throat. I wanted to run to get as far away from that horrific scene as I could, but it was my job to investigate. Trembling, I crept closer. The corpse wore a ranger's uniform. Its face was a ruin of blood and tattered flesh, as if savaged by wild animals. One eye socket yawned obscenely empty. Yet I recognized it instantly from the photos I'd been shown during training. It was my predecessor, a man who'd gone missing months before his radio crackled to staticky life, issuing forth a single raspy word, "Run." I should have heeded my predecessor's final warning and fled those cursed Pennsylvania woods. But where could I go? With no money and no prospects, I was trapped in that hellish wilderness as surely as a fly in a spider's web, and so I tried to bury myself in work to ignore the uncanny signs proliferating around me. I investigated abandoned campsites where fires still smoldered in the pits, but no people could be found. I fielded panic calls about hikers gone missing along the park's twisting trails. Neatly severed deer legs turned up on my doorstep like macabre gifts. Sleep became a distant memory as I patrolled the forest day and night. My eyes were gritty and my nerves frayed, always watching the trail line for signs of the grim fate that pursued me. Then came that fateful night of the new moon. An impenetrable murk drowned the forest, and even the stars seemed to hide their faces. As I trudged through that primordial gloom on yet another patrol, a sound arose that turned my blood to ice water.
an eerie piping, both enticing and maddening, that wormed into my brain and pulled me onward against my will into a part of the park I had never explored. I clawed my way through underbrush that tore at my skin like teeth, compelled by that haunting melody. Bursting into a clearing, I beheld a sight that would haunt me until my dying breath. Dark figures cavorted around a bonfire in some sort of depraved ritual, their faces concealed by crude wooden masks. On the stone altar lay the body of a camper who had been reported missing days earlier. The figures brandished gleaming knives, and human chants spewed from their lips an ancient language that scorched my ears. One of them turned to face me, and behind the mask I saw eyes black and dead as a shark's. In that moment I knew with numb certainty that no one would ever find my body. The dark legends that stalked these hills had sprung to nightmarish life, and I was to be their next sacrifice. I ran crashing blindly through the night-shrouded forest, thorns ripping my flesh, the mad piping nipping at my heels. Branches snatched at me like demon claws. At last I burst from the tray line and flung myself into my decrepit cabin, slamming the bolts behind me. Chest heaving, I sank to the floor as the horrible revelation crashed over me. The malevolent force I'd felt stalking me. It wore a human face. The day I walked among us, and it had made these woods its lair shell. Shocked and reeling, I did the only thing I could think of, requested an immediate transfer. Within days, I found myself assigned to a state park in the far northern reaches of Wisconsin. I'd always found peace in the unspoiled North Woods. Surely there I could escape the supernatural evil that plagued me. But madness, it seemed, was not so easy to leave behind. It clung to me like a foul miasma, infecting the very air I breathed. The drive to my new post seemed to take forever, the forest pressing in on all sides. When at last I arrived at the remote ranger station, I discovered it was no better than the Pennsylvania hovel I'd abandoned. Paint curled from the walls, cobwebs draped every corner, and the sour reek of mildew permeated the air. But I was in too deep now. The debts kept mounting and no other work would have me, and so, with leaden feet and a clenched jaw, I stepped over the threshold into my moldering new home. The first night brought a storm of biblical proportions. Thunder shook the cabin walls and rain lashed the windows like 1,000 frantic fingers. As I lay on the sagging cot watching lightning paint ghoulish shadows on the ceiling, a thump sounded from the porch outside. Then another, slow, ponderous, like the footfalls of something titanic and rotted. Heart-pounding, I crept to the window and peered into the rain-swept night. 2 pinpricks of eerie blue light stared back at me from the darkness. They were too high, too widely set to be humanized. My mind screamed for me to run to hide, but my limbs remained frozen. The thing shambled closer with a tread that shook the earth. In a flash of lightning, I glimpsed a visage from the depths of hell, a gargantuan skull-like face thatched with strips of peeling skin. Antlers sprouted from its head like a crown of swords, and a long serpentine tongue slithered between needle-like teeth. The creature stooped to regard me with those luminous eyes that radiated a cold alien intelligence. In their depths I saw my own insignificance. An insect in the face of something ancient beyond comprehension and hungry beyond imagining. Then it turned and vanished into the roaring storm, leaving me slumped beneath the window in a puddle of my own fear-soaked sweat. From that night onward, nowhere felt safe. The forest crawled with whispering shadows, and each rustle of leaves sounded like dead voices murmuring my name. Hurtcast spoke of glimpsing a tall, pierced figure lurking at the tree line. I found the ravaged carcasses of deer strung up between pines like hunter totems. And always, whether patrolling sunlit trails or lying in my bunk at night, I felt its presence, watching, waiting, savoring my dawning insanity like a rare wine. Soon even the familiar began to twist into the unnatural. The cheerful song of the starling warped into mocking laughter.
My own face in the mirror became a gaunt, sunken-eyed mask I barely recognized. I took to the bottles of cheap whiskey. I had squirreled away, desperate to anesthetize myself against the creeping horror. But not even the fiery bliss of alcohol could burn away the visions that hounded me deep down. I knew running again would solve nothing. This primal evil, it seemed, would dog my steps no matter how far I fled. It had marked me, claimed me, and it would never let me go. All paths lead me back into its lightless embrace. All I could do was try to survive it. And oh, what a hollow thing survival is when your every moment is flayed raw by terror. I had gazed into the abyss, and the abyss had gazed back with a ravenous grin. There could be no escape for me, not in this life or the next. I was eternally damned. Numbly mechanically, I continued to go through the motions of being a park ranger in northern Wisconsin, but my mind was a charnel house of dark visions, and the clinging miasma of fear never left me. I folded calls from hysterical campers, swearing they'd seen stilt-legged shadows prowling the forest. I examined the shredded remains of tents ripped open as if by giant claws. At night, unearthly shrieks wailed from the benighted woods, howls of something that had long lost its humanity or perhaps never possessed it at all. No matter how much I drank to cushion myself from the horror, there was no respite. The anthered thing that haunted the forest hunted me relentlessly, a malevolent shade that lurked even behind my closed eyelids. I glimpsed it between dark trunks as I patrolled the trails, felt its hot breath misting the back of my neck as I huddled in my bunk. It wanted me to know there was no escape, that I belonged to it utterly. As the summer drew to a close and autumn's cool breath began to gild the leaves, the sightings from terrified campers and hikers grew more frequent. The desecrated animal carcasses appeared with grisly regularity, each one more savage than the last. When a pair of hunters went missing along the park's lonely backcountry trails, I was tasked with leading the search party. For 3 days and nights we combed those brooding woods, calling the hunters' names until our voices grew hoarse, never dreaming of the doom we courted with each step. On the 4th day we found what was left of them. It was strung up between 2 pines in a grotesque tableau, and trails dangling like streamers, faces frozen in rictuses of agony. The missing pieces of them were later found miles away, gnawed down to splintered bones and shredded scraps of fabric. What rational mind could accept such savagery? I dutifully filed my report with the police, but the words felt like ashes in my mouth. Animal attack was the official line, as if any earthly creature was capable of such malevolence. But I knew the truth that lurked behind that thin veneer of civilization. I had seen the face of evil that stalked these forests, and it would haunt me into eternity. With the grim discovery of the hunter's remains, the park was closed to visitors. For the first time, an unnatural quiet settled over the woods, the silence of a predator contemplating its next kill. Alone in my drafty cabin, with only a radio that remained stubbornly silent and the creeping shadows for company, I felt my tenuous grip on sanity fray a little more with each passing day. Then came the final night, when the gathering darkness pressed in on the cabin with suffocating weight. I huddled in the sputtering light of a kerosene lamp, a rifle across my knees, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. When the lamp flickered out, plunging me into inky blackness, the tiny spark of hope I'd foolishly nurtured guttered out with it. From the night-shrouded forest arose a soft tread, the delicate snap of twigs beneath a careful foot. My heart thudded against my ribs as if trying to escape the cage of my chest. Through the window drifted a rhythmic creaking, the sound of something heavy settling on the aging boards of the porch, knuckles white on the rifle stock. I edged toward the door. I knew I should bolt it, I should barricade myself inside, but the same morbid curiosity that had drawn me to my predecessor's corpse now pulled me forward. If I was to meet my doom, let it be face to face with the antlered thing that had haunted my every step. With a trembling hand, I flung open the door, and there it stood, a gaunt silhouette blotting out the stars, twin circles of icy light where eyes should be. No, not light pits, pits that drank in the darkness and vomited it back out, drained of all warmth. In their fathomless depths, I saw my own annihilation writ large. I raised the rifle to my shoulder, but before I could summon the courage to pull the trigger, a gust of frigid wind tore it from my hand, sent it clattering into the black maw of the forest. It spoke its voice, the grade of stone on crumbling bone. One word, just one. But it seared my mind like a white-hot brand mud. I wished I could claim that the beast's guttural declaration jolted me from my paralysis, that I turned and fled into the sheltering arms of the night. But in truth, I was a marionette tangled in the strings of my own fear, unable to compel my leaden limbs to action. I could only stand mute and trembling as the antlered monstrosity ducked its massive head and shouldered its way into my cabin with a splintering of wood. The stench of wet earth and something far fouler rolled off the creature in dizzying waves as it loomed over me in the darkness. Its foam seemed to writhe and distort, ancient skin sloughing off in strips to reveal the pulsing obsidian nothingness beneath. Hellish blue light glowed from the depths of its eye sockets, twin stars of pure malice that burned into my soul and laid bare every secret shame, every hidden fear. With a ragged cry, I launched myself at the hulking thing, swinging wildly in a final futile show of defiance. My blows landed with fleshy thuds, yet it gave no more reaction than a mountain would to the flailing of an ant. A bony hand shot out, wrapped around my throat, lifted me off my feet as if I weighed nothing at all. Skeletal fingers tightened, cutting off my air. As my vision narrowed to a pinprick and my pulse roared in my ears, the only thought that pierced the haze of my terror was that I would die here alone and unmourned, another missing person whose file would grow dusty with neglect. The oblivion that rushed up to claim me almost came as a relief, but the antlered devil had other plans for me. With a dismissive flick of its wrist, it hurled me against the wall like a ragdoll. Pain exploded through my body at the impact, and I crumpled to the floor in a broken heap, my extremities twitching in a marionette's grotesque parody of movement. The thing knelt over my paralyzed form, its death mask face inches from mine. In a voice that slithered through my guts like a knotted rope of ice, it spoke words that flensed the very flesh from my mind. Your pitiful life is forfeited. Your soul is mine to devour. All that you were would soon nourish the old growth. Why I croaked through a throat lined with broken glass, an infant's question mumbled to an uncaring God. Why me? But there was no mercy, no reason to be found in those piercing blue eyes. Only the inexorable workings of a process vaster and more ancient than human comprehension. I was not a person to this primordial thing. I was meat. I was warmth and wetness to fill its empty husk, sustenance to sustain it for another century of stalking its gossamer webs between the worlds. With an arm that stretched and deformed in unnatural ways, it seized me by the leg and dragged me out of the cabin across the leaf-strewn ground that would soon cradle my lifeless husk into the forest. It pulled me into a darkness thicker than the world's ending, the only sound being my nails splintering against the floorboards as I scrabbled for a hold. My last sight, before the hungry shadows swallowed me forever, was of those glowing blue eyes searing my face like cold fire. My last thought was a fleeting wish that death would be a true oblivion, an endless, dreamless sleep. In the black eternity that followed, I learned that there are hells far worse than any the human mind can imagine. That death is not always the end, that in forgotten corners of primeval forests, ancient rites still hold sway. It keeps me alive in a fashion, this antlered god of a time before time. It sustains the guttering candle flicker of my consciousness long after my body has been reduced to fodder and mulch. It gifts me with sight beyond sight, the better to bear witness to the depravities it visits on those foolish enough to stray into its domain. hikers whose knapsacks grow dusty in the lost and found, the trail runners who vanish between one breath and the next, the children who toddle off into the twilight, as heedless of danger as they are of the bright baubles that litter the forest floor. It wants me to see, and I do see, through eyes that stream endless tears. I am the watchful ghost who stalks these woods, and the uneasy prickle of dread at the back of your neck when you stray from the path. I am the nightmares that jerk you awake in a cold midnight sweat. I am the final scream that no one hears. Tell my story, carry my warning, bar your doors, ward your windows, shutter your mind to the siren song of the forest depths, because out there, in the ancient rotting heart of an eldritch darkness, something waits and it hungers. The creature's words ooze through my mind like toxic sludge seeping into the cracks of my battered psyche. Your soul is mine to devour. The phrase reverberated endlessly in my skull, a cruel reminder that my life, my very essence, was forfeit to this abomination. It fractured something deep inside me, the realization that I was nothing more than a husk to be drained and discarded by some incomprehensible evil. The foundations of my sanity, already corroded by months of terror, began to crumble in earnest. I felt myself fragmenting memories and thoughts, a jumbled kaleidoscope of horror. The thing hauled my limp body through the forest with no more effort than a child dragging a stuffed toy. My head knocked against roots and stones, fresh pain jolting through me with each impact, the only proof that I still lived. Branches whipped my face and tore at my uniform as if the trees themselves sought to erase any trace of my existence. And ever on, the demon strode unerringly, purposely drawing me into the black, pulsing heart of its domain. At last, it flung me to the damp leaf-strewn earth of a small clearing. Towering pines ringed the space like jagged teeth, their branches entwining overhead to shut out all light. In the center, a hummock of earth and twisted roots rose like an altar reeking of centuries of blood sacrifice. The antlered god loomed over me, silhouette carved from congealed shadow. You are blessed. It thrust a skeletal hand into the soil of the altar mound, gouged a dripping wound that disgorged a writhing mass of rotted bones bound by ropey tendons. Flesh of the earth, take this vessel and be renewed. The glistening jumble shivered, then broke apart. Yellowed finger bones scuttled toward me like pale spiders, phalanges twitching with obscene eagerness. They swam over my paralyzed limbs, burrowing under skin, crawling through veins. The agony defied, language defied comprehension. In that moment I would have welcomed the void of death, embraced eternal oblivion. Anything to escape the feeling of something alien growing, spreading, subsuming the tattered remnants of my humanity. I wheezed through a throat filled with grave dirt, no longer sure if I was begging for mercy or for the release of annihilation. But the abomination that wore the forest like a cloak had no use for pleading. The pact must be served where its mouth should be, the skull face split in a lipless grin. Now you are mine. In the final paroxysm of unholy communion, the antlered god shoved a hand into my chest. Icy talons pierced my heart, shredded and remade it in the image of something black and eternally hungry. Between one stuttering beat and the next, the last trembling mote of myself guttered out, replaced by a changeling shade. An unquiet spirit yoked to my shambling corpse of a body. I rose on legs that bent at unnatural angles, the remnants of my identity sloughed away like a molten skin. Narrowed roots twisted through my rotting flesh, stitched shut the most egregious of my wounds. My vision sharpened to a predator's keen clarity, while my mind faded to a trackless fog, lit only by the fell gleam of the god's eyes. I had become a thing of the dark places, a night walker, eternally bound to my master's side, no longer a man but a hollow shell, animated by the unclean energies of the forest's black heart, a revenant, a haunt, bereft of conscience,
remorse, and any desire, but to fed the insatiable void that yawned within me. The primal guardian of the ancient woods turned its horned head to regard its new acolyte. "Come, my child, let us hunt." Without hesitation, I followed my liege back into the welcoming shadows of the forest, the leaves sighing a discordant welcome. And then I once was would have recoiled at the atrocities to come, but that man was no more. In his place crept a thing of claw and shadow, dead yet undying, given fang and form by the forest's relentless fury. Campers whisper of my legend around guttering fires. Hikers glimpse my twisted silhouette skulking between the pines. I am the animal attack, the unknown accident, the empty tent, and the abandoned backpack. I serve the ineffable will of an elder god, and I am always eternally hungry. This is my warning scrawled in blood and despair. Stay away from lonely places. Stick to well-worn paths. Ward your campsites with trembling prayers to gods of concrete and smog. And never ever answer the siren song of the night black forest. 'Cause they'll be there, waiting, watching, salivating for the warmth of your terror, the sweet marrow of your screams. Many who come to these woods seek to reconnect with nature, to lose themselves in the cathedral hush of primeval green. They'll want to peel back the veneer of civilization, shed modernity's cacophonous skin, and find succor in the wilderness. Poor fools! If they truly opened their eyes, they would see the forest for what it is, a place of old power and ancient malice, where the laws of progress hold no sway. But even now, mired as I am in the unclean mire of the forest corrupted heart, some distant part of me pities them, pities and envies their ignorance, their naivety. What I wouldn't give to lose my cursed sight, to once again walk beneath the aspens and oaks and see only sunlight and greenery, uncomplicated by the creeping horrors that lurk in every shadow. For I am a slave to the preternatural senses my new nature has bestowed. The pallid fungal growths that feed on the decaying leavings of the forest, God's depravity. The skittering things, all chitinous and mandible, that gnaw endlessly at the roots of the world, the spectral figures that flicker at the edges of even my hellish sight. Trapped between this world and the next, I see them all, at times lost in the crimson labyrinth of my fractured mind. I wonder about the man I used to be, the frightened boy who loved the woods, the desperate youth who clung to the forest service as his only salvation. Did he cry out, railing against the dying of the light, as the last threads of his humanity unspooled? Does some wretched ghost of him live on, a mournful shade, entombed behind my lidless leaden eyes? I suppose it hardly matters that life is an ephemeral dream, dissipating like mist beneath a harsh sun. Only the hunt endures, the timeless ritual of pursuit and sanguine sacrifice. It is the only truth I know, the only one I need. So I serve my eternal vigil, watchful revenant enthroned in a kingdom of root and bone. Supplicants, do not whisper my name around campfires. They dare not speak it at all, lest they summon the crawling dark. Park rangers do not include me in their brochures, but the savvy ones know to leave their wards and talismans on nights when the moon hides its face. I am the myth that walks the legend with fang and claw, the monster beneath the bed of the forest. Dreaming. I am the ghost story made snarling flesh, the childhood nightmare that follows you home and curls up at the foot of your bed. I am everything that you fear, lurking in the rustling hush of an autumn wood. My story will never see the light of day, will never comfort those who grieve for the lost and the discarded. Those search parties will brave the teeth of the forest to recover my moldering bones. I am beyond saving, beyond mourning, a shard of frozen shadow forever bound to my antlered leech. But perhaps on nights when you wake in a fever of nameless dread, the taste of loam thick on your tongue and your heart shrinking in your breast, perhaps you will think of me. Spare a shuddering thought for the wretch that haunts the lonely spaces, the lost boy who gazed too long into the abyss and found it had a face both pitiless and familiar, 'Cause now, at the hour when shadows grow long in the wild places, call with a voice of velvet darkness, there I hunt and I am always forever hungry. So go on, tremble behind your locks and your lights, your fossil fuel talismans whispering your stories of the forest stalker, the antler man, old bone daddy and his moss-eaten rags. They will keep you safe for a time, but do not think you are beyond my reach, little rabbits. Do not think the old ways cannot find you, even in your cities of chrome and asphalt. When the equinox tides surge and the black moon call, look for me in the places where the shadows gather and the wild things creep. You'll be there, waiting, hungry, forever hungry. And you will taste so sweet,